Tao Te Ching by Laozi. Colophon, the Tao Te Ching was written around the 6th century BC by Laozi. It was translated from classical Chinese in 1891 by James Legge. This ebook was produced for Standard eBooks by Alex Cabal and is based on a transcription produced in 2008 by Gregory Waka and David Widger for Project Gutenberg and on digital scans available at Google Books. The cover page is adapted from the Kangxi Emperor's Southern Inspection Tour, Scroll 3, Jinan to Mount Tai, a painting completed in 1698 by Wang Hui. The cover and title pages feature the League Spartan and Sots Mill Gaudi typefaces created in 2014 and 2009 by the League of Movable Type. This edition was released on November 7, 2024, 8:56 p.m., and is based on revision 80,018A1. The first edition of this ebook was released on May 25, 2014, 12 o'clock a.m. You can check for updates to this ebook, view its revision history, or download it for different e-reading systems at standardbooksorg/ebooks/laozi/Tao Te Ching/James Legge. The volunteer-driven Standard eBooks project relies on readers like you to submit typos, corrections, and other improvements. Anyone can contribute at Standard Booksorg. Accounts of Laozi and Chuang Tizu given by S. Suma Ch. Letter 2BDIEN. It seems desirable, before passing from Lao and Chuang in this introduction, to give a place in it to what is said about them by S. Suma Ch. Letter 2BDIEN. I have said that not a single proper name occurs in the Tao Te Ching. There is hardly an historical allusion in it. Only one chapter, the 20th, has somewhat of an autobiographical character. It tells us, however, of no incidents of his life. He appears alone in the world through his cultivation of the Tao, melancholy and misunderstood, yet binding that Tao more closely to his bosom. The books of Chunag Tizu are of a different nature, abounding in pictures of Taoist life, in anecdotes and narratives, graphic, argumentative, often satirical. But they are not historical. Confucius and many of his disciples, Lao and members of his school, heroes and sages of antiquity, and men of his own day, move across his pages, but the incidents in connection with which they are introduced are probably fictitious, and devised by him to point his moral or adorn his tale. His names of individuals and places are often like those of Bunyan in his Pilgrim's Progress or his Holy War, emblematic of their characters and the doctrines which he employs them to illustrate. He often comes on the stage himself, and there is an air of verisimilitude in his descriptions, possibly also a certain amount of fact about them, but we cannot appeal to them as historical testimony. It is only to S. Suma Ch. Letter 2BDIEN that we can go for this. He always writes in the spirit of a historian, but what he has to tell us of the two men is not much. And first, as to his account of Laozi. When he wrote about the beginning of the 1st century BC, the Taoist master was already known as Laozi. Ch. Letter 2BDIEN, however, tells us that his surname was Lai, and his name Er, meaning ear, which gave place after his death to Tan, meaning long-eared, from which we may conclude that he was named from some peculiarity in the form of his ears. He was a native of the state of Ch. Letter 2BDU, which had then extended far beyond its original limits, and his birthplace was in the present province of Henan or of Anhui. He was a curator in the royal library, and when Confucius visited the capital in the year BC 517, the two men met. Ch. Letter 2BDIEN says that Confucius's visit to Luoyang was that he might question Lao on the subject of ceremonies. He might have other objects in mind as well, but however that was, the two met. Lai said to K. Letter 2BDUNG, "The men about whom you talk are dead, and their bones are molded to dust. Only their words are left. Moreover, when the superior man gets his opportunity, he mounts aloft. But when the time is against him, he is carried along by the force of circumstances. 34 I have heard that a good merchant, though he have rich treasures safely stored, appears as if he were poor, and that the superior man, though his virtue be complete, is yet to outward seeming stupid. Put away your proud air and many desires, your insinuating habit and wild will. They are of no advantage to you. This is all I have to tell you." Confucius is made to say to his disciples after the interview, "I know how birds can fly, fishes can swim, and animals run, but the runner may be snared, the swimmer hooked, and the flyer shot by the arrow. But there is the dragon. I cannot tell how he mounts on the wind through the clouds and rises to heaven. Today I have seen Laozi, and can only compare him to the dragon. In this speech of Confucius we have, I believe, the origin of the name Laozi as applied to the master of Taoism. Its meaning is the old philosopher, or the old gentleman. 35 Confucius might well so style Lai heir. At the time of this interview, he was himself in his 35th year, and the other was in his 88th. Ch. Letter 2bdien adds, Laozi cultivated the Tao and its attributes, the chief aim of his studies being how to keep himself concealed and remain unknown. He continued to reside at the capital of Chu, but after a long time, seeing the decay of the dynasty, he left it and went away to the barrier gate, leading out of the kingdom on the northwest. Yin Hsi, the warden of the gate, said to him, You are about to withdraw yourself out of sight. Let me insist on your, first, composing for me a book. On this, Laozi wrote a book in 2 parts, setting forth his views on the Tao and its attributes in more than 5,000 characters. He then went away, and it is not known where he died. He was a superior man who liked to keep himself unknown. Ch. Letter 2bdien finally traces Lao's descendants down to the 1st century BC, and concludes by saying, Those who attach themselves to the doctrine of Laozi condemn that of the literati, and the literati on their part condemn Laozi, verifying the saying, Parties whose principles are different cannot take counsel together. Lai heir taught that by doing nothing others are as a matter of course transformed, and that rectification in the same way ensues from being pure and still. This morsel is all that we have of historical narrative about Laozi. The account of writing of the Tao Te Ching at the request of the warden of the barrier gate has a doubtful and legendary appearance. Otherwise, the record is free from anything to raise suspicion about it. It says nothing about previous existences of Lao, and nothing of his traveling to the West, and learning there the doctrines which are embodied in his work. He goes through the pass out of the domain of Chu, and died no one knowing where. It is difficult, however, to reconcile this last statement with a narrative in the end of Chuang Tzu's 3rd book. There we see Laozi dead, and a crowd of mourners wailing round the corpse, and giving extraordinary demonstration of grief, which offend a disciple of a higher order, who has gone to the house to offer his condolences on the occasion. But for the peculiar nature of most of Chuang Tzu's narratives, we should say, in opposition to Ch. Letter 2bdien, that the place and time of Lao's death were well known. Possibly, however, Chuang Tzu may have invented the whole story, to give him the opportunity of setting forth what, according to his ideal of it, the life of a Taoist master should be, and how even Laozi himself falls short of it. Second, Ch. Letter 2bdien's account of Chuang Tzu is still more brief. He was a native, he tells us, of the territory of Mang, which belonged to the kingdom of Liang or Wei, and held an office, he does not say what, in the city of Ch. Letter 2bdiyuan. Chuang was thus of the same part of China as Laozi, and probably grew up familiar with all his speculations and lessons. He lived during the reigns of Kings Hui of Liang, Suan of Ch. Letter 2bdi, and Y of Ch. Letter 2bdu. We cannot be wrong, therefore, in assigning his period to the latter half of the 3rd and earlier part of the 4th century BC. He was thus a contemporary of Mencius. They visited at the same courts, and yet neither ever mentions the other. They were the 2 ablest debaters of their day, and fond of exposing what they deemed heresy. But it would only be a matter of useless speculation to try to account for their never having come into argumentative collision. Ch. Letter 2bdien says, Chuang had made himself well acquainted with all the literature of his time, but preferred the views of Laozi, and ranked himself among his followers, so that of the more than 10 myriads of characters contained in his published writings, the greater part are occupied with metaphorical illustrations of Lao's doctrines. He made the old fisherman, the robber of Chi, and the cutting open satchels, to satirize and expose the disciples of Confucius, and clearly exhibit the sentiments of Lao. Such names and characters as Wile H. Su and K. Letter 2bd, Ang Sang Tzu are fictitious, and the pieces where they occur are not to be understood as narratives of real events. 36, but Chuang was an admirable writer and skillful composer, and by his instances and truthful descriptions hit and exposed the mohists and literati. The ablest scholars of his day could not escape his satire nor reply to it, while he allowed and enjoyed himself with his sparkling, dashing style, and thus it was that the greatest men, even kings and princes, could not use him for their purposes. King Y of Ch. Letter 2bdu, having heard of the ability of Chuang Chu, sent messengers with large gifts to bring him to his cot, and promising also that he would make him his chief minister. Chuang Tzu, however, only laughed and said to them, 1,000 ounces of silver are a great gain to me, and to be a high noble and minister is most honorable position. But have you not seen the victim ox for the barter sacrifice? It is carefully fed for several years, and robed with rich embroidery that it may be fit to enter the grand temple. When the time comes for it to do so, it would prefer to be a little pig, but it cannot get to be so. Go away quickly, and do not soil me with your presence. I had rather amuse and enjoy myself in the midst of a filthy ditch than be subject to the rules and restrictions in the cot of a sovereign. I have determined never to take office, but prefer the enjoyment of my own free will. Ch. Letitubdien concludes his account of Chuang Tzu with the above story, condensed by him, probably, from 2 of Chuang's own narratives, in Pa. 11 of BK, Roman 17, and 13 of Roman 32, to the injury of them both. Paragraph 14 of Roman 32 brings before us one of the last scenes of Chuang Tzu's life, and we may doubt whether it should be received as from his own pencil. It is interesting in itself, however, and I introduce it here. When Chuang Tzu was about to die, his disciples signified their wish to give him a grand burial. I shall have heaven and earth, he said, for my coffin and its shell, the sun and moon for my 2 round symbols of jade, the stars and constellations for my pearls and jewels. Will not the provisions for my interment be complete? What would you add to them? The disciples replied, We are afraid that the crows and kites will eat our master. Chuang Tzu rejoined above, The crows and kites will eat me. Below, the mole crickets and ants will eat me. To take from those and give to these would only show your partiality. Such were among the last words of Chuang Tzu. His end was not so impressive as that of Confucius, but it was in keeping with the general magniloquence and strong assertion of independence that marked all his course. Preface by James Legge in the preface to the 3rd volume of these Sacred Books of the East, 1879. I stated that I proposed giving in due course, in order to exhibit the system of Taoism, translations of the Tao Te Ching by Laozi, 6th century BC, 1. The writings of Chuang Tzu, between the middle of the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, and the treatise of Actions and Their Retributions of our 11th century, and perhaps also of one or more of the other characteristic productions of the system. The 2 volumes now submitted to the reader are a fulfillment of the promise made so long ago. They contain versions of the 3 works which were specified, and in addition, as appendixes, 4 other shorter treatises of Taoism, analyses of several of the books of Chuang Tzu by Lin H. Saicheng, a list of the stories which form so important a part of those books, 2 essays by 2 of the greatest scholars of China, written the one in AD 586, and illustrating the Taoistic beliefs of that age, and the other in AD 1078, and dealing with the 4 books of Chuang Tzu, whose genuineness is frequently called in question. The concluding index is confined very much to proper names. For subjects, the reader is referred to the tables of contents, the introduction to the books of Chuang Tzu, Vol. Roman 39 pp. 127-163, and the introductory notes to the various appendixes. Point 2, the treatise of Actions and Their Retributions exhibits to us the Taoism of the 11th century in its moral or ethical aspects. In the 2 earlier works, we see it rather as a philosophical speculation than as a religion in the ordinary sense of that term. It was not till after the introduction of Buddhism into China in our 1st century that Taoism began to organize itself as a religion, having its monasteries and nunneries, its images and rituals. While it did so, it maintained the superstitions peculiar to itself. Some, like the cultivation of the Tao, as a rule of life favorable to longevity, come down from the earliest times, and others which grew up during the decay of the Chu dynasty, and subsequently blossomed, now in mystical speculation, now in the pursuits of alchemy, now in the search for the pills of immortality and the elixir vitae, now in astrological fancies, now in visions of spirits and in magical arts to control them, and finally in the terrors of its purgatory and everlasting hell. Its phases have been continually changing, and at present it attracts our notice more as a degraded adjunct of Buddhism than as a development of the speculations of Laozi and Chuang Tzu. Up to its contact with Buddhism, it subsisted as an opposition to the Confucian system, which, while admitting the existence and rule of the Supreme Being, bases its teaching on the study of man's nature and the enforcement of the duties binding on all men from the moral and social principles of their constitution. It is only during the present century that the texts of Taoism have begun to receive the attention which they deserve. Christianity was introduced into China by Nestorian missionaries in the 7th century, and from the Xi'an monument, which was erected by their successors in 781, nearly 150 years after their first entrance, we perceive that they were as familiar with the books of Laozi and Chuang Tzu as with the Confucian literature of the empire. But that monument is the only memorial of them that remains. In the 13th century, the Roman Catholic Church sent its earliest missionaries to China, but we hardly know anything of their literary labors. The Great Romish Mission, which continued to the present day, began towards the end of the 16th century. And there exists now in the India Office a translation of the Tao Te Ching in Latin, which was brought to English by a Mr. Matthew Raper, and presented by him to the Royal Society, of which he was a fellow, on January 10, 1788. The manuscript is in excellent preservation, but we do not know by whom the version was made. It was presented, as stated in the introduction, Pa. 1, to Mr. Raper by P. de Gramont, Missionarius Apostolicus, ex Jesuita. The chief object of the translator or translators was to show that the mysteries of the Most Holy Trinity and of the incarnate God were anciently known to the Chinese nation. The version as a whole is of little value. The reader will find, in Endnote 108, its explanation of Lao's 72nd chapter, the first morsel of it that has appeared in print. Protestant missions to China commenced in 1807, but it was not till 1868 that the Rev. Dr. Chalmers, a member of one of them, published his speculations on metaphysics, polity, and morality of the old philosopher, Laozi. Meanwhile, Abel Rémusat had aroused the curiosity of scholars throughout Europe in 1823 by his memoir on the life and opinions of Laozi, a Chinese philosopher of the 6th century before our era, who professed the opinions commonly attributed to Pythagoras, to Plato, and to their disciples. Rémusat was followed by one who had received from him his first lessons in Chinese and had become a truly great Chinese scholar, the late Stanislas Julien. He published in 1842 a complete translation for the first time of this memorable work, which is regarded with reason as the most profound, the most abstract, and the most difficult of all Chinese literature. Dr. Chalmers's translation was also complete, but his comments, whether original or from Chinese sources, were much fewer than those supplied by Julien. 2 years later, 2 German versions of the treatise were published at Leipzig by Reinhold von Plenkner and Victor von Strauss, differing much from each other, but both marked by originality and ability. I undertook myself, as stated above, in 1879 to translate for the sacred books of the East the texts of Taoism which appear in these volumes, and as I could find time from my labors on the texts of Confucianism, I had written out more than one version of Lao's work by the end of 1880. Though not satisfied with the result, I felt justified in exhibiting my general views of it in an article in the British Quarterly Review of July, 1883. In 1884, Mr. F. H. Balfour published at Shanghai a version of Taoist texts, ethical, political, and speculative. His texts were 10 in all, the Tao Te Ching being the first and longest of them. His version of this differed in many points from all previous versions, and Mr. H. A. Giles, of H.M.'s consular service in China, vehemently assailed it, and also Dr. Chalmers's translation, in the China Review for March and April, 1886. Mr. Giles indeed occasionally launched a shaft also at Julien and myself, but his main object in his article was to discredit the genuineness and authenticity of the Tao Te Ching itself. The work, he says, is undoubtedly a forgery. It contains, indeed, much that Laozi did say, but more that he did not. I replied, so far as was necessary, to Mr. Giles in the same review for January and February, 1888, and a brief summary of my reply is given in the 2nd chapter of the introduction in this volume. My confidence has never been shaken for a moment in the Tao Te Ching as genuine relic of Laozi, one of the most original minds of the Chinese race. In preparing the version now published, I have used, first, the complete works of the 10 philosophers, a Suzhou reprint in 1804 of the best editions of the philosophers, nearly all belonging more or less to the Taoist school, included in it. It is a fine specimen of Chinese printing, clear and accurate. The treatise of Laozi of course occupies the first place, as edited by Cui Yuquang, better known as Cui Chan Ch Letter 2B Dun, of the Ming dynasty. The text and commentary are those of Ho Shang Kung in Trud. Pa. 7, along with the division of the whole into parts and 81 chapters, and the titles of the several chapters, all attributed to him. Along the top of the page, there is a large collection of notes from celebrated commentators and writers down to the editor himself. Second, the text and commentary of Wang Pai, called also Fu S Su, who died AD 249 at the early age of 24. See Introduction, Pa. 8. Third, helps lit. Wings to Laozi, by Chiro Hung, called also Zhou Hu, and prefaced by him in 1587. This is what Julian calls the most extensive and most important contribution to the understanding of Laozi, which we yet possess. Its contents are selected from the ablest writings on the treatise from Han Fei in Trud. Pa. 3, downwards, closing in many chapters with the notes made by the compiler himself in the course of his studies. Altogether, the book sets before us the substance of the views of 64 writers on our shot Ching. Julian took the trouble to analyze the list of them, and found it composed of 3 emperors, 20 professed Taoists, 7 Buddhists, and 34 Confucianists, all members of the literati. He says, these last constantly explain Laozi according to the ideas peculiar to the school of Confucius, at the risk of misrepresenting him, and with the express intention of throttling his system. Then adding, the commentaries written in such a spirit have no interest for persons who wish to enter fully into the thought of Laozi, and obtain a just idea of his doctrine. I have thought it useless, therefore, to specify the names of such commentaries and their authors. I have quoted these sentences of Julian because of a charge brought by Mr. Balfour, in a prefatory note to his own version of the Tao Te Ching, against him and other translators. One prime defect, he says, though with some hesitation, lies at the root of every translation that has been published hitherto, and this is that not one seems to have been based solely and entirely on commentaries furnished by members of the Taoist school. The Confucian element enters largely into all, and here, I think, an injustice has been done to Laozi. To a Confucianist, the Taoist system is in every sense of the word a heresy, and a commentator holding his opinion is surely not the best expositor. It is as a grammarian, rather than as a philosopher, that a member of the Ju Chia deals with the Tao Te Ching. He gives the sense of a passage according to the syntactical construction, rather than according to the genius of the philosophy itself, and in attempting to explain the text by his own canons, instead of by the canons of Taoism, he mistakes the superficial and apparently obvious meaning for the hidden and esoteric interpretation. Mr. Balfour will hardly repeat his charge of imperfect or erroneous interpretation against Julian, and I believe that is equally undeserved by most, if not all, of the other translators against whom it is directed. He himself adopted as his guide the explanations of the Tao Te Ching, current as the work of Lu Yen, called also Lu Tzu, Lu Tungpin, and Lu Ch Letter 2BD Yun Yang, a Taoist of the 8th century. Through Mr. Balfour's kindness, I have had an opportunity of examining this edition of Lao's treatise, and I am compelled to agree with the very unfavorable judgment on it pronounced by Mr. Giles as both spurious and ridiculous. All that we are told of Lu Yen is very suspicious, much of it evidently false. The editions of our little book ascribed to him are many. I have for more than 20 years possessed one with the title of the meaning of the Tao Te Ching, explained by the true man of Ch Letter 2BD Yun Yang, being a reprint of 1690, and as different as possible from the work patronized by Mr. Balfour. Fourth, the T Letter 2BD I Shang H Suen Yuan Tao Te Ching, a work of the present dynasty, published at Shanghai, but when produced I do not know. It is certainly of the Lu Tzu type, and is worth purchasing as one of the finest specimens of block printing. It professes to be the production of the immortals of the 8 grottos, each of whom is styled a divine ruler, Tai Chun. The 81 chapters are equally divided for commentary among them, excepting that the divine ruler, the universal refiner, has the last 11 assigned to him. The text is everywhere broken up into short clauses, which are explained in a very few characters by God, the true helper, the same, I suppose, who is also styled the divine ruler, the true helper, and comments at length on chapters 31 to 40. I mention these particulars as an illustration of how the ancient Taoism has become polytheistic and absurd. The name God, the True Helper, is a title, I imagine, given to Lu Tzu. With all this nonsense, the composite commentary is a good one, the work, evidently, of one hand. One of the several recommendatory preface is ascribed to Wan Ch Letter 2 Bd, the god of literature, and he specially praises the work, as explaining the meaning by examination of the text. Fifth, a collection of the most important treatises of the Taoist fathers, Tao Tzu Chan Ch Letter 2 Bdu An Kai Yao. This was reprinted in 1877 at Changzhou in Jiangsu, beginning with the Tao Te Ching and ending with the Kan Ying P Letter 2 Bdien. Between these, there are 14 other treatises, mostly short, 5 of them being among Mr. Balfour's Taoist texts. The collection was edited by a Lu Yu, and the commentary selected by him, in all but the last treatise, was by a Lai Hsi Yue, who appears to have been a recluse in a monastery on a mountain in the department of Paoning, Sichuan, if indeed, what is said of him be not entirely fabulous. Sixth, the commentary on the Tao Te Ching, by Wu Xiecheng, ad 1249-1333, of Lin Ch Letter 2 Bd. This has been of the highest service to me. Wu Xiecheng was the greatest of the Yuan scholars. He is one of the literati quoted from occasionally by Chihiro, hung in his wings, but by no means so extensively as Julian supposes. Observations Dataches p. Roman 41. My own copy of his work is in the 12th section of the large collection of the Yueya Hall, published in 1853. Writing of Wu Xiecheng in 1865, Prologue. To the Shu, p. 36, I said that he was a bold thinker and a daring critic, handling his text with a freedom which I had not seen in any other Chinese scholar. The subsequent study of his writings has confirmed me in this opinion of him. Perhaps he might be characterized as an independent, rather than as a bold, thinking, and the daring of his criticism must not be supposed to be without caution. See Introd. p. 9. 3. I have thus set forth all that is necessary to be said here, by way of preface. For various information about the treatises comprised in the appendixes, for the reader is referred to the preliminary notes, which preceded the translation of most of them. I have often sorely missed the presence of a competent native scholar who would have assisted me in the quest of references, and in talking over difficult passages. Such a helper would have saved me much time, but the result, I think, would scarcely have appeared in any great alteration of my versions. J. L. Oxford, December 20, 1890. Uncopyright may you do good and not evil. May you find forgiveness for yourself and forgive others. May you share freely, never taking more than you give. Copyright pages exist to tell you that you can't do something. Unlike them, this uncopyright page exists to tell you that the writing and artwork in this ebook are believed to be in the United States public domain. That is, they are believed to be free of copyright restrictions in the United States. The United States public domain represents our collective cultural heritage, and items in it are free for anyone in the United States to do almost anything at all with, without having to get permission. Copyright laws are different all over the world, and the source text or artwork in this ebook may still be copyrighted in other countries. If you're not located in the United States, you must check your local laws before using this ebook. Standard ebooks makes no representations regarding the copyright status of the source text or artwork in this ebook in any country other than the United States. Non-authorship activities performed on items that are in the public domain, so-called sweat of the brow, work, don't create a new copyright. That means that nobody can claim a new copyright on an item that is in the public domain for, among other things, work like digitization, mock-up, or typography. Regardless, the contributors to this ebook release their contributions under the terms in the CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication, thus dedicating to the worldwide public domain all of the work they've done on this ebook, including but not limited to metadata, the title page, imprint, colophon, this uncopyright, and any changes or enhancements to, or mock-up on, the original text and artwork. This dedication doesn't change the copyright status of the source text or artwork. We make this dedication in the interest of enriching our global cultural heritage, to promote free and libre culture around the world, and to give back to the unrestricted culture that has given all of us so much. Table of Contents Landmarks. In notes throughout the book, All renditions of Latinized Chinese words follows the Wade-Giles romanization system. However, because most readers are probably more familiar with the name Laozi and Tao Te Ching, romanization for these two terms were retained. SE. Editor write much of what is referred in the past two paragraphs that is not directly related to the Tao Te Ching is not included in this ebook production, but the paragraphs are retained for context. SE. Editor write the rest of the preface by Leg solely concerns his translation of Chuang Tzu and other Shata Taoist works, which was originally included in his work Sacred Books of the East, Vol. Roman 39 and XL, as published. Because these has no relevance to this ebook production of the Tao Te Ching, they are omitted. SE. Editor write the appendixes referred here by Leg is not included in this ebook production. SE. Editor write the 6th chapter of Laozi's treatise, that about the spirit of the valley, is referred to in Li Tzu, I1b, as being from Huang Tai, from which the commentator Tu Tao Chin, about AD 1300, takes occasion to say. From which we know that Laozi was accustomed to quote in his treatise passages from earlier records, as when he refers to the remarks of some sage, of some ancient, of the sentence makers, and of some writer on Wa. In all these cases he is clearly introducing the words of earlier wise men. The case is like that of Confucius when he said, "I am a transmitter and not a maker," etc., found in Chiro Hung in Locke. Right see in books Roman 9, X and Roman 12. Right in the present district of Lingbao, Shanju, province of Henan. Right in an ordinary student's manual, I find a note with reference to this incident to which it may be worth while to give a place here. The warden, it is said, set before Laozi a dish of tea, and this was the origin of the custom of tea drinking between host and guest. See the Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, ch. 7, on food and drink. Right, the earlier old man of the Hoside is styled in Chinese, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, the other Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, but the designation have the same meaning. Some critical objections to the genuineness of the latter's commentary on the ground of the style are without foundation. Right see Chiro Hung's Wings or Helps, ch. VP 11a. Write Notes on Chinese Literature, p. 173. Write a section of this introduction here is omitted as it solely concerned of the book Chuang Tzu and other writings by the farmer's namesake, which are not included in this ebook production. SE. Editor Write Language and Languages, pp. 184, 185. Write Nata, Quist, Lib, Roman 2 Cap, Roman 14. Write Martineau's Types of Ethical Theory, IP, 286 and his whole conjectural history of Spinoza's thought. Write Chinese letter is equivalent to the Greek letter 1F2 1 letter 1F Fa 1 delta omicron sigma, the way, where this name for the Christian system occurs in our revised version of the New Testament in the Acts of the Apostles. The literal rendering is adhered to, way being printed with a capital W C Acts 9, 2, 19, 9, 22 Fa, 24 14, 24 22. Write Chinese letter Chinese letter. The K letter 2BD ANGHSI dictionary defines T letter 2BD by Lu, road or way. Medhurst gives road. Unfortunately, both Morrison and Williams overlooked this definition of the character. Giles has also a note in Locke, showing how this synonym settles the original meaning of Tao in the sense of road. Write the Tao Te Ching, ch. 25 and Chuang Tzu, Roman 13 pa. 1. Write See Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio, Vol. IP. 1 Note 2. Write Quang Chang Tzu heads the list of characters in Ko Hung's History of Spirit-like Immortals, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, written in our 4th century. He was, it is said, an immortal of old who lives on the hill of K letter 2BD Tung in a grotto of rocks. Right for this sentence we find in Mr. Balfour, spirits of the dead, receiving it, become divine. The very gods themselves owe their divinity to its influence, and by it both heaven and earth were produced. The version of it by Mr. Giles is too condensed. Spiritual beings drew their spirituality their form, while the universe became what we see it now. Right compare also BK, Roman 22 pa, 7, 8, and Roman 23 pa, 10. Right Mr. Balfour had given for this sentence, in the beginning of all things there was not even nothing. There were no names, these arose afterwards. In his critique on Mr. Balfour's version in 1882, Mr. Giles proposed, at the beginning of all things there was nothing, but this nothing had no name. He now in his own version gives it, at the beginning of the beginning, even nothing did not exist. Then came the period of the nameless, an improvement certainly on the other, but which can hardly be accepted as the correct version of the text. Write the Tao Te Ching ch 14, et al. Right ch 50. Right, that is, between heaven and earth. Right quoted in the amplification of the 16 precepts or maxims of the second emperor of the present dynasty by his son. The words are from Dr. Milne's version of the Sacred Edict, p. 137. Right in his index of the TRIPI letter 160 Akea, Mr. Buneo Nangio, p. 359, assigns Liu Mai and his work to the Yuan dynasty. In a copy of the work in my possession they are assigned to that of Sung. The author, no doubt, lived under both dynasties, from the Sung to the Yuan. Right CBK, Roman 15 pa. 1. Right BK, Roman 11 pa. 5. Right BK, Roman 16 pa. 2. Right Tao Te Ching ch. 19. Right Confucian Analects, Roman 1436. Right Julian translates this by il era ele venture. In 1861 I rendered it, he moves as if his feet were entangled. To one critic, it suggests the idea of a bundle or wisp of brushwood rolled about over the ground by the wind. Right, the character may mean the old boy, and so understood have given rise to various fabulous legends that his mother had carried him in her womb for 72 years, some say for 81, and that when born the child had the white hair of an old man. Julian has translated the fabulous legend of Ko Hung of our 4th century about him. By that time, the legends of Buddhism about Sakyamuni had become current in China, and were copied and applied to Laozi by his followers. Looking at the meaning of the two names, I am surprised no one has characterized Laozi as the Chinese Seneca. Right K letter 2 BD, AN Jisang Tizu, is evidently the Kang Sang CH letter 2 BDU of Chuang's book Roman 23. Wile H. Su is supposed by S. Suma Chan of the T letter 2 BD NG dynasty, who called himself the Lesser S. Suma, to be the name of a book, one, in that case, of the lost books of Chuang. But as we find the hill of Wile mentioned in BK, Roman 23, as the scene of K letter 2 BD, AN Jisang Tizu's Taoistic labors and success, I suppose that CH letter 2 BD IENS reference is to that. The names are quoted by him from memory, or might be insisted on as instances of different readings. Right Chinese letter, embodying the Tao. The author sets forth, as well as the difficulty of his subject would allow him, the nature of the Tao in itself and its manifestation. To understand the Tao one must be partaker of its nature. Pa. 3 suggests the words of the Apostle John, "He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love." Both the Tao, Laozi's ideal in the absolute, and its Ter, or operation, are comprehended in his chapter, the latter being the Tao with the name, the mother of all things. See the 3rd chapter of the introduction. Right Chinese letter, the nourishment of the person, but many of Ho Shang Kung's titles are more appropriate than this. The chapter starts with instances of the antinomies, which suggest to the mind each of them the existence of its corresponding opposite, and the author finds in them an analogy to the contraries, which characterize the operation of the Tao, as stated in chapter 40. He then proceeds to describe the action of the sage in Pa. 3 as in accordance with this law of contraries, and in Pa. 4 that of heaven and earth, or what we may call nature, in the process of the vegetable world. Pa. 2 should be rhymed, but I could not succeed to my satisfaction in the endeavor to rhyme it. Everyone who can read Chinese will see that the first 4 members rhyme. The last 2 rhyme also, the concluding Chinese letter being pronounced so. See the K letter 2 BD ANGHSI dictionary in Vok. Right Chinese letter, keeping the people at rest. The object of the chapter is to show that government, according to the Tao, is unfavorable to the spread of knowledge among the people, and would keep them rather in the state of primitive simplicity and ignorance, thereby securing their restfulness and universal good order. Such is the uniform teaching of Laozi and his great follower Chuang Tizu, and of all Taoist writers. Right Chinese letter, the fountainless. There is nothing before the Tao. It might seem to have been before God, and yet there is no demonstration by it of its presence and operation. It is like the emptiness of a vessel. The second character equals Chinese letter, CK letter 2 BD ANGHSI on the latter. The practical lesson is that in following the Tao, we must try to be like it. Right Chinese letter, the use of emptiness. Quiet and unceasing is the operation of the Tao, and effective is the rule of the sage in accordance with it. The grass dogs in Pa, one were made of straw tied up in the shape of dogs, and used in praying for rain, and afterwards, when the sacrifice was over, were thrown aside and left uncared for. Heaven and earth and the sages dealt so with all things and with the people, but the illustration does not seem a happy one. Both Chuang Tzu and Huainan mention the grass dogs. See especially the Fama, Roman 14, 25a, b. In that book there is fully developed the meaning of this chapter. The illustration in Pa, too, is better. The Chinese bellows is different to look at from ours, but the principle is the same in the construction of both. The Pa concludes in a way that lends some countenance to the later Taoisms dealing with the breath. Right Chinese letter, the completion of material forms. This title rightly expresses the import of this enigmatical chapter, but there is a foundation laid in it for the development of the later Taoism, which occupies itself with the prolongation of life by the management of the breath, Chinese letter, or vital force. The valley is used metaphorically as a symbol of emptiness or vacancy, and the spirit of the valley is the something invisible, yet almost personal, belonging to the Tao, which constitutes the Te, Chinese letter, in the name of our Ching. The spirit of the valley has come to be a name for the activity of the Tao in all the realm of its operation. The female mystery is the Tao with a name of Chapter 1, which is the mother of all things. All living beings have a father and mother. The processes of generation and production can hardly be imaged by us, but by a recognition of this fact. And so Laozi thought of the existing realm of nature, of life, as coming through an evolution, not a creation, from the primal air or breath, dividing into two, and thence appearing in the forms of things, material and immaterial. The chapter is found in Li Tzu, I1b, quoted by him from a book of Huang Tai, and here Laozi has appropriated it and made it his own. See the introduction. Right Chinese letter, sheathing the light. The chapter teaches that one's best good is realized by not thinking of it or seeking for it. Heaven and earth afford a pattern to the sage, and the sage affords a pattern to all men. Right Chinese letter, the placid and contented nature. Water, as an illustration of the way of the Tao, is repeatedly employed by Laozi. The various forms of what is excellent in Pa, too, are brought forward to set forth the Ma, by contrast, the excellence of the humility indicated in the acceptance of the lower place, without striving to the contrary. Right Chinese letter, but I cannot give a satisfactory rendering of this title. The teaching of the chapter is that fullness and complacency in success are contrary to the Tao. The first clauses of the two sentences in Pa. 1. Chinese letter, 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 are instances of the inverted style not uncommon in the oldest composition. The way of heaven equals the heavenly Tao, exemplified by man. Right Chinese letter, possibilities. This chapter is one of the most difficult to understand and translate in the whole work. Even Chu Hsi was not able to explain the first member satisfactorily. The text of that member seems well supported, but I am persuaded the first clause of it is somehow corrupt. The whole seems to tell what can be accomplished by one who is possessed of the Tao. In Pa 3, he appears free from all self-consciousness in what he does, and of all self-satisfaction in the results of his doing. The other two paragraphs seem to speak of what he can do under the guidance of the Tao for himself and for others. He can, by his management of his vital breath, bring his body to the state of Taoistic perfection, and keep his intelligent and animal souls from being separated, and he can rule men without purpose and effort. The gates of heaven, in Pa 2, is a Taoistic phrase for the nostrils as the organ of the breath. See the commentary of Ho Shang Kung. Right Chinese letter, the use of what has no substantive existence. The three illustrations serve to set forth the freedom of the Tao from all preoccupation and purpose, and the use of what seems useless. Right Chinese letter, the repression of the desires. Government in accordance with the Tao seeks to withdraw men from the attractions of what is external and pleasant to the senses and imagination, and to maintain the primitive simplicity of men's ways and manners. Compare Chap. 2. The 5 colors are black, red, green or blue, white, and yellow. The 5 notes are those of the imperfect Chinese musical scale, our G, A, B, D, E, The 5 tastes are salt, bitter, sour, acrid, and sweet. I am not sure that Wang Pai has caught exactly the author's idea in the contrast between satisfying the belly and satisfying the eyes, but what he says is ingenious. In satisfying the belly one nourishes himself. In gratifying the eyes he makes a slave of himself. Right Chinese letter, loathing shame. The chapter is difficult to construe, and some disciples of Chu Hsi had to ask him to explain it, as in the case of Ch. 10. His remarks on it are not to my mind satisfactory. Its object seems to be to show that the cultivation of the person according to the Tao is the best qualification for the highest offices, even for the government of the world. Pa. 3 is found in Chuang Tizu, Roman 11:18b, in a connection which suggests this view of the chapter. It may be observed, however, that in him, the position of the verbal characters in the 2 clauses of the paragraph is the reverse of that in the text of Ho Shang Kung, so that we can hardly accept the distinction of meaning of the 2 characters given in his commentary, but must take them as synonyms. Professor Gablantz gives the following version of Chunag Tizu. Darum, Gebrocht sane person echsam in der Verwaltung des Reiches, so mag man ihm die Reichsgewalt anvertrauen, lebend skonend, übertragen. Right Chinese letter, the manifestation of the mystery. The subject of Pa. 1 is the Tao, but the Tao in its operation, and not the primal conception of it as entirely distinct from things, which rises before the mind in the 2nd paragraph. The Chinese characters which I have translated, the eckable, the inaudible, and the subtle, are now pronounced Yi, Hsi, and Y, and in 1823, Ray Musat fancied that they were intended to give the Hebrew tetragrammaton, Hebrew Yod, Hebrew He, Hebrew Vav, Hebrew He, which he thought had some to Laozi somehow from the West, all being found by him there. It was a mere fancy or dream, and still more so is the recent attempt to revive the notion by Victor von Strauss in 1870 and Dr. Edkins in 1884. The idea of the latter is specially strange, maintaining, as he does, that we should read the characters according to their old sounds. Laozi has not in the chapter a personal being before his mind, but the procedure of his mysterious Tao, the cause according to which the visible phenomena take place, incognizable by human sense and capable of only approximate description by term appropriate to what is within the domain of sense. See the introduction ch. 3 Pa. 8. Right Chinese letter, the exhibition of the quality, that is, of the Tao, which has been set forth in the preceding chapter. Its practical outcome is here described in the masters of it of old, who in their own weakness were yet strong in it, and in their humility were mighty to be co-workers with it for the good of the world. The variety of the reading in Pa. 4 is considerable, but not so as to affect the meaning. This Pa is found in Huainan, Roman 12:23a, with an unimportant variation. From the illustration to which it is subjoined, he understood the fullness, evidently as in ch. 9, as being that of a vessel filled to overflowing. Both here and there such fullness is used metaphorically of a man overfull of himself, and then Laozi slides into another metaphor, that of a worn-out garment. The text of Pa. 3 has been variously tampered with. I omit the Chinese letter of the current copies, after the example of the editors of the Great Recension of the Yongle period, ad 1403-1424, of the Ming dynasty. Right Chinese letter, returning to the root. The chapter exhibits the operation of the Tao in nature, in man, and in government, an operation silent but all-powerful, unaccompanied with any demonstration of its presence, but great in its results. An officer receives a charge or commission from his superior, Chinese letter. When he reports the execution of it, he is said Chinese letter. So all animate things, including men, receive their charge from the Tao as to their life, and when they have fulfilled it, they are represented as reporting that fulfillment. And the fulfillment and report are described as their unchanging rule, so that they are the Tao's impassive instruments, having no will or purpose of their, according to Laozi's formula of doing nothing and yet doing all things, Chinese letter. The getting to possess the Tao, ought to be an embodiment of it, follows the becoming of heaven or heaven-like, and this is in accordance with the saying in the 4th chapter that the Tao might seem to have been before God. But in Chuang Tizu especially, we often find the full possession of the Tao is exempt from all danger of decay, is generally illustrated by a reference to the utterances in ch. 50. As if Laozi did indeed see in the Tao a preservative against death. Right Chinese letter, the unadulterated influence. The influence is that of the Tao, as seen in the earliest and paradisiacal times. The two chapters that follow are closely connected with this, showing how the silent, passionless influence of the Tao was gradually and injuriously superseded by the wisdom of the world in the conduct of government. In the first sentence there is a small various reading of Chinese letter for Chinese letter, but it does not affect the meaning of the passage. The first clause of Pa, 2 gives some difficulty. Chinese letter, they made their words valuable or precious, i.e., they seldom spake, cp. 1 Samuel 3:1. Right Chinese letter, the decay of manners. A sequel to the preceding chapter, and showing also how the general decay of manners afforded opportunity for the display of certain virtues by individuals. Observe the great Tao, occurring here for the first time as the designation of the Tao. Right Chinese letter, return to the unadulterated influence. The chapter desires a return to the simplicity of the Tao and shows how superior the result would be to that of the more developed systems of morals and government which had superseded it. It is closely connected with the 2 chapters that precede. Laozi's call for the renunciation of the methods of the sages and rulers in lieu of his fancied paradisiacal state is repeated ad nauseum by Chuang Tzu. Right Chinese letter, being different from ordinary men. The chapter sets forth the difference to external appearance which the pursuit and observance of the Tao produces between its votaries and others, and Laozi speaks in it as himself an example of the former. In the last 3 chapters, he has been advocating the cause of the Tao against the learning and philosophy of the other school of thinkers in the country. Here he appears as having renounced learning and found an end to the troubles and anxieties of his own mind, but at the expense of being misconceived and misrepresented by others. Hence the chapter has an autobiographical character. Having stated the fact following the renunciation of learning, he proceeds to dwell upon the troubles of learning in the rest of Pa. 1. Until the votary of learning knows everything, he has no rest, but the instances which he adduces of his are not striking nor easily understood. I cannot throw any light on the 4 lines about the yes and the yeah. Confucius, Anna. Roman 16, Roman 8 specifies 3 things of which the superior man stands in awe, and these and others of a similar nature may have been the things which Laozi had in his mind. The nursing mother at the end is, no doubt, the Tao in operation, with a name, as in ch1. The mysterious virtue of chapters 51 and 52. Right Chinese letter, the empty heart. But I fail to see the applicability of the title. The subject of the chapter is the Tao in its operation. This is the significance of the Chinese letter in the first clause or line, and to render it by virtue, as Julian and Chalmers do, only serves to hide the meaning. Julian, however, says that the virtue is that of the Tao, and he is right in taking Chinese letter, the lost character of the second line, as having the sense of from, the sauce from, and not, as Chalmers does, in the sense of following. Laozi's mind is occupied with a very difficult subject, to describe the production of material forms of the Tao. How or from what, he does not say. What I have rendered semblances, Julian less images, and Chalmers forms seems, as the latter says, in some way to correspond to the eternal ideas of Plato in the divine mind, but Laozi had no idea of personality in the Tao. Right Chinese letter, the increase granted to humility. This title rightly expresses the subject matter of the chapter. I cannot translate the first clause otherwise than I have done. It was an old saying, which Laozi found and adopted. Whether it was intended to embrace all the cases which are mentioned may be questioned, but he employs it so as to make it do so. The emptiness, which becomes full, is literally the hollowness of a cavity in the ground, which is sure to be filled by overflowing water. See Mencius, Roman 4 Roman 2:18. The worn out is explained by the withered foliage of a tree, which comes out new and fresh in the next spring. I have taken the first sentence of Pa. 2, as Wu Xiechang does, see his commentary in Locke. Right Chinese letter, absolute vacancy. This, I think, is the meaning of the title, emptiness and nothingness, as entire conformity to the Tao in him who professes to be directed by it. Such a one will be omnipotent in his influence in all others. The Tao in him will restrain all spasmodic loquacity. Those who are described in Pa. 2 as failing, are not to be thought of as bad men, men given up, as Julian has it, o crime. They are simply ordinary men, who have failed in their study of the Tao and practice of it, but are won to truth and virtue by the man whom the author has in mind. As we might expect, however, the mention of such men has much embarrassed the commentators. Compare the concluding sentence with the one at the end of Pa. 1 in ch. 17. Right Chinese letter, painful graciousness. The chapter should be so designated. This concludes the subject of the 2 previous chapters, pursuing the cause of the unemotional Tao without vain effort or display. The remnants of food were not used as sacrificial offerings. See the Lai Kai Vol. Roman 27 p. 82. In what I have rendered by a tumor attached to the body, the Chinese letter is probably by a mistake for Chinese letter. See a quotation by Wu Xiechang from S. Summa ch letter 2 bdien. Which all dislike is, literally, things are likely to dislike them. The things being spirits and men, as Wu explains the term. Right Chinese letter, representations of the mystery. In this chapter, Lao approaches very near to give an answer to the questions as to what the Tao is, and yet leaves the reader disappointed. He commences by calling it a thing, Chinese letter, but that term does not necessitate our regarding it as material. We have seen in the preceding chapter that it is used to signify spirits and men. Nor does his going on to speak of it as chaotic, Chinese letter, necessarily lead us to conceive it as made up of the material elements of things. We have the same term applied in ch. 14 to the 3 immaterial constituents that are said to be blended in the idea of it. He does not know its name, and he designates it by the term denoting a cause of way, Tao, Chinese letter, and indicating the phenomenal attribute, the method in which all phenomena come before our observation, in their development or evolution. And to distinguish it from all other methods of evolution, he would call it the Great Method. And so he employs that combination as its name in ch. 18 and elsewhere, but it cannot be said that this name has fully maintained itself in the writings of his followers. But understood thus, he here says, as in ch. 1, that it is the mother of all things. And yet, when he says that it was before heaven and earth were produced, he comes very near his affirmations in chapters 1 and 4, that the nameless Tao was the beginning, or originating cause, of heaven and earth, and might seem to have been before God. Was he groping after God if haply he might find him? I think he was, and he gets so far as to conceive of him as the uncaused cause, but comes short of the idea of his personality. The other subordinate causes which he mentions all get their force or power from the Tao, but after all the Tao is simply a spontaneity, evolving from itself, and not acting from a personal will, consciously in the direction of its own wisdom and love. Who can by searching find out God? Who can find out the Almighty to perfection? The predicate of the Tao in the chapter, most perplexing to myself, is it returns, in Pa.3. It flows away, far away, and comes back. Are not the 3 statements together equal to it is everywhere? Right Chinese letter, the quality of gravity. Gravity and stillness are both attributes of the Tao, and he who cultivates it must not give way to lightness of mind or hasty action. The rule for a leader not to separate from his baggage wagons is simply the necessity of adhering to gravity. I have adopted from Han Fei the reading of The Wise Prince for the Sage, which is found in Ho Shang Kung, and later on the reading of Has Lost His Root for His Loses His Ministers, though the latter is found also in Han Fei. Right Chinese letter, dexterity in using, that is, in the application of the Tao. This is the substance of the chapter, celebrating the effective but invisible operation of the Tao, and the impartial exercise of it for the benefit of all men and all things. I have given the most natural construction of the 2 characters at the end of Pa. 1, the only possible construction of them, so far as I can see, suitable to the context. The action of the Tao, non-acting and yet all-efficient, and that of the sage in accordance with it, are veiled by their nature of the sight of ordinary men. It is more difficult to catch the scope and point of Pa. 2. If there were not the conditions described in it, it would be hard for even an intelligent onlooker to distinguish between the man who had the skill and the man without it, between his who possessed the Tao, and him who had it not, which would be strange indeed. Right Chinese letter, returning to simplicity. The chapter sets forth humility and simplicity and artless freedom from all purpose, as characteristic of the man of Tao, such as he was in the primeval time. The sage, in Pa. 2 may be the son of heaven, the head of all rule in the kingdom, or the feudal lord in a state. Right Chinese letter, taking no action. All efforts made with a purpose are sure to fail. The nature of the Tao necessitates their doing so, and the uncertainty of things and events teaches the same lesson. That the kingdom or throne is a spirit-like vessel has become a common enough saying among the Chinese. Julian has, El Empire est Khmer un vase divin, but I always shrink from translating Chinese letter by divine. Its English analog is spirit, and the idea in the text is based on the immunity of spirit from all material law, and the uncertain issue of attempts to deal with it according to ordinary methods. Wu Xiechang takes the phrase as equivalent to superintended by spirits, which is as inadmissible as Julian's divine. The Tao forbids action with a personal purpose, and all such action is sure to fail in the greatest things as well as in the least. Right Chinese letter, a caveat against war. War is contrary to the spirit of the Tao, and, as being so, is productive of misery, and leads to early ruin. It is only permissible in a case of necessity, and even then its spirit and tendencies must be guarded against. In translating Chinese letter by striking a decisive blow, I have no doubt followed Julian's frapper un coup décisif. The same Chinese letter occurs 6 times in Pa. 3, followed by Chinese letter, and Chiro Hung says that in all but the first instance the Chinese letter should be taken as equivalent to Chinese letter, so that we should have to translate. He is determined against being vain, etc. But there is no necessity for such a construction of Chinese letter. Weakness and not strength is the character of the Tao, hence the lesson in Pa. Fa, right Chinese letter, stilling Wa. The chapter continues the subject of the preceding. The imperially appointed editors of Wang Pai's text and commentary, 1765, say that from the beginning of Pa. 2 to the end, there is the appearance of text and commentary being mixed together, but they make no alteration in the text as it is found in Hoshang Kung, and in all other ancient copies. The concluding sentence will suggest to some readers the words of the Duke of Wellington, that to gain a battle was the saddest thing next to losing it. Right Chinese letter. Chalmers translates this by sagely virtue, but I cannot adopt that rendering, and find it difficult to supply a better. The virtue is evidently the attribute of the Tao come out from the condition of the absolute, and capable of being named. In the former state it has no name, in the latter, it has. Pa, 1 and the commencement of Pa. Fa must both be explained from ch1. The primordial simplicity in Pa. 2 is the Tao in its simplest conception, alone and by itself, and the Chinese letter in Pa. 4 is that Tao come forth into operation and become Ter, the Ter which affords a law for men. From this to the end of the paragraph is very obscure. I have translated from the text of Wang Pai. The text of Hoshang Kung is different, and he comments upon it as it stands, but to me it is inexplicable. Right Chinese letter, discriminating between different attributes. The teaching of the chapter is that the possession of the Tao confers the various attributes which are here most distinguished. It has been objected to it that elsewhere the Tao is represented as associated with dullness and not intelligence, and with weakness and not with strength. But these seem to be qualities viewed from without, and acting on what is beyond itself. Inwardly, its qualities are the very opposite, and its action has the effect of enlightening what is dark, and overcoming what is strong. More interesting are the predicates in Pa. 2. Chiro Hung gives the comment on it of the Indian monk, Kumarajava, one of the 4 sons of Buddhism, and who went to China in AD 401. To be alive and yet not alive may well be called long. To die and yet not be dead may well be called longevity. He also gives the view of Lu Nengshi, ad 1042-1102, that the freedom from change of Li Tizu, from the death of Chuang Tizu, and from extinction of the Buddhists, have all the same meaning as the concluding saying of Laozi here, that the human body is like the covering of the caterpillar or the skin of the snake, that we occupy it but for a passing sojourn. No doubt, Laozi believed in another life for the individual after the present. Many passages in Chuang Tizu indicate the same faith. Right Chinese letter, the task of achievement. The subject is the greatness of what the Tao, called here by Lao's own name for it in ch. 25, does, and the unconscious simplicity with which it does it, and then the achievements of the sage who is permeated by the Tao. Pa. 2 is descriptive of the influence of the Tao in the vegetable world. The statements and expressions are much akin to those in parts of chapters 2, 10, and 51, and for Hoshang Kung's difficult reading of Chinese letter, some copies give Chinese letter, as in chapter 2. Write Chinese letter, the attribute of benevolence. But there seems little appropriateness in this title. The subject of the chapter is the inexhaustible efficacy of the Tao for the good of the world. The great image of the invisible Tao is a name for the Tao in its operation, as in chapters 14 and 41. He who embodies this in his government will be a center of attraction for all the world. The Chinese letter, may be taken as a predicate of the holder of the great image. If he go all under heaven teaching the Tao. Both constructions are maintained by commentators of note. In Pa. 2, the attraction of the Tao is contrasted with that of ordinary pleasures and gratifications. Write Chinese letter, minimizing the light. Equivalent, as Wu Xiechang has pointed out, to the Chinese letter of ch. 27. The gist of the chapter is to be sought in the second paragraph, where we have 2 instances of the action of the Tao by contraries, supposed always to be for good. But there is a difficulty in seeing the applicability to this cases mentioned in Pa. 1. The first case, indeed, is merely a natural phenomenon, having no moral character. But the others, as they have been illustrated from historical incidents, by Han Fei and others at least, belong to schemes of selfish and unprincipled ambitious strategy, which it would be injurious to Laozi to suppose that he intended. Pa. 3 is the most frequently quoted of all the passages in our Ching, unless it be the first part of ch. 1. Fishes taken from the deep and brought into shallow water can be easily taken or killed, that is plain enough. The sharp instruments of a state are not its weapons of war, nor its treasures, nor its instruments of government, that is, its rewards and punishments, though this last is the interpretation often put on them, and sustained by a foolish reference to an incident, real or coined, in the history of the dukedom of Sung. The lie ch letter to bdi are contrivances for gain, machines, and other methods to increase the wealth of a state, but according to the principles of Laozi, really injurious to it. These should not be shown to the people, whom the Taoistic system would keep in a state of primitive simplicity and ignorance. This interpretation is in accordance with the meaning of the characters, and with the general teaching of Taoism. In no other way can I explain the paragraph so as to justify the place undoubtedly belonging to it in the system. Write Chinese letter, the exercise of government. This exercise should be according to the Tao, doing without doing, governing without government. The subject of the third paragraph is a feudal prince of the king, and he is spoken of in the first person to give more vividness to the style, unless the Chinese letter I may possibly be understood of Laozi himself, personating one of them. Write Chinese letter, about the attributes of Tao, that is. It is not easy to render Tao here by any other English term than virtue, and yet there would be a danger of its thus misleading us in the interpretation of the chapter. The virtue is the activity or operation of the Tao, which is supposed to have come out of its absoluteness. Even Han Fei so defines it here. Tao is the meritorious work of the Tao. In Pa. 5 we evidently have a resume of the preceding paragraphs, and as it is historical, I translate them in the past tense, though what took place on the early stage of the world may also be said to go on taking place in the experience of every individual. With some considerable hesitation, I have given the subjects in those paragraphs in the concrete, in deference to the authority of Hoshang Kung and most other commentators. The Fama says, by the highest Tao is to be understood the rulers of the greatest antiquity, without name or designation, whose virtue was great, and could not be surpassed. Most ingenious, and in accordance with the Taoistic system, is the manner in which Wu Xiechang construes the passage, and I am surprised that it has not been generally accepted. By the higher Tao, he understands the Tao, that which is prior to and above the Tao, Chinese letter, 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 Chinese letter. By the lower Tao, benevolence, that which is after and below the Tao which is above benevolence. By the higher righteousness, the benevolence which is above righteousness, and by the higher propriety, the righteousness which is above propriety. Certainly in the summation of these 4 paragraphs which we have in the 5th, the subjects of them would appear to have been in the mind of Laozi, as thus defined by Wu. In the remainder of the chapter, he goes on to speak depreciatingly of ceremonies and knowledge, so that the whole chapter must be understood as descriptive of the process of decay and deterioration from the early time in which the Tao and its attributes swayed the societies of men. Right Chinese letter, The Origin of the Law. In this title, there is a reference to the law given to all things by the Tao, as described in the conclusion of chapter 25, and the Tao affords that law by its passionless, undemonstrative nature, through which in its spontaneity, doing nothing for the sake of doing, it yet does all things. The difficulty of translation is in the 3rd paragraph. The way in which princes and kings speak depreciatingly of themselves is adduced as illustrating how they have indeed got the spirit of the Tao, and I accept the last epithet as given by Ho Shang Kung. Naveless, Chinese letter, instead of Chinese letter, equals the unworthy, which is found in Wang Pai and has been adopted by nearly all subsequent editors. To see its appropriateness here, we have only to refer back to chapter 11, where the 30 spokes and the nave, empty to receive the axle, are spoken of, and it is shown how the usefulness of the carriage is derived from that emptiness of the nave. This also enables us to give a fair and consistent explanation of the difficult clause which follows, in which also I have followed the text of Ho Shang Kung. For his Chinese letter, Wang Pai has Chinese letter, which also is found in a quotation of it by Huainan Tizu, but this need not affect the meaning. In the translation of the clause, we are assisted by a somewhat similar illustration about a horse in the 25th of Chuang Tizu's books, Pa. 10. Right Chinese letter, dispensing with the use of means. With their use, that is, as it appears to us. The subject of the brief chapter is the action of the Tao by contraries, leading to a result the opposite of what existed previously, and by means which might seem calculated to produce a contrary result. In translating Pa. 2, I have followed Chiro Hung, who finds the key to it in Ch. 1. Having a name, the Tao is the mother of all things. Having no name, it is the originator of heaven and earth. But here is the teaching of Laozi. If Tao seemed to be before God, Tao itself sprang from nothing. Right Chinese letter, sameness and difference. The chapter is a sequel of the preceding, and may be taken as an illustration of the Tao's proceeding by contraries. Who the sentence makers were whose sayings are quoted we cannot tell, but it would have been strange if Laozi had not had a large store of such sentences at this command. The 5th and 6th of those employed by him here are found in Li Tizu Roman 2:15a, spoken by Lao in reproving Yang Chu, and in Romans 7:3a, that heretic appears quoting an utterance of the same kind, with the words, according to an old saying, Chinese letter, Right Chinese letter, the transformations of the Tao. In Pa. 2, we have the case of the depreciating epithets given to themselves by kings and princes, which we found before in Ch. 39, and a similar lesson is drawn from it. Such depreciation leads to exaltation, and the contrary cause of self-exaltation leads to abasement. This latter case is stated emphatically in Pa. 3, and Laozi says that it was the basis of his teaching. So far, therefore, we have in this chapter a repetition of the lesson that the movement of the Tao is by contraries, and that its weakness is the sure precursor of strength. But the connection between this lesson and what he says in Pa. 1 it is difficult to trace. Up to this time at least it has baffled myself. The passage seems to give us a cosmogony. The Tao produced one. We have already seen that the Tao is the One. Are we to understand here that the Tao and the One were one and the same? In this case, what would be the significance of the Chinese letter, produced? That the Tao which had been previously non-existent now became existent, or capable of being named. This seemed to be the view of S. Suma Quang, at 1009-1086. The most singular form which this view assumes is in one of the treatises on our Ching, attributed to the Taoist patriarch Lu, Chinese letter, that the One is heaven, which was formed by the congealing of the Tao. According to another treatise, also assigned to the same Lu, Chinese letter, the One was the primordial ether. The 2, the separation of that into its yin and yang constituents. And the 3, the production of heaven, earth, and man by these. In quoting the paragraph, Huainan Tizu omits Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter and commences with Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter, and his glossarist, Cao Yu, makes out the one to be the Tao, the two to be spiritual intelligences, Chinese letter, and the three to be the harmonizing breath. From the mention of the yin and yang that follows, I believe that Laozi intended by the two these two qualities or elements in the primordial ether, which would be the one. I dare not hazard a guess as to what the three were. Right Chinese letter, the universal use of the action in weakness of the Tao. The chapter takes us back to the lines of Ch. 40, that weakness marks the cost of Tao's mighty deeds. By the softest thing in the world, it is agreed that we are to understand water, which will wear away the hardest rocks. Dashing against and overcoming is a metaphor taken from hunting. Hoshang Kung says that what has no existence is the Tao. It is better to understand by it the unsubstantial aired Chinese letter, which penetrates everywhere, we cannot see how. Compare Pa 2 with Ch2 Pa 3. Right Chinese letter, cautions. The chapter warns men to let nothing come into competition with the value which they set on the Tao. The Tao is not named, indeed, but the idea of it was evidently in the writer's mind. The whole chapter rhymes after a somewhat peculiar fashion, familiar enough, however, to one who is acquainted with the old rhymes of the Book of Poetry. Right Chinese letter, great or overflowing virtue. The chapter is another illustration of the working of the Tao by contraries. According to Wu Xiechang, the action which overcomes cold is that of the yang element in the developing primordial ether, and the stillness which overcomes heat is that of the contrary yin element. These may have been in Laozi's mind, but the statements are so simple as hardly to need any comment. Wu further says that the purity and stillness are descriptive of the condition of non-action. Right Chinese letter, the moderating of desire or ambition. The chapter shows how the practice of the Tao must conduce to contentment and happiness. In translating Pa, when I have, after Wu Xiechang, admitted a Chinese letter after the Chinese letter, his chief authority for doing so being that it is so found in a poetical piece by Chang Hang, ad 78-139. Chu Hsi also adopted this reading, Chinese letter, Roman 18:7a. In Pa, Tu Han Ying has a tempting variation of Chinese letter for Chinese letter, but I have not adopted it because the same phrase occurs elsewhere. Right Chinese letter, surveying what is far off. The chapter is a lesson to men to judge of things according to their internal conviction of similar things in their own experience. Short as the chapter is, it is somewhat mystical. The phrase, the Tao, or way of heaven, occurs in it for the first time, and it is difficult to lay down its precise meaning. Laozi would seem to teach that man is a microcosm, and that, if he understand the movements of his own mind, he can understand the movements of all other minds. There are various readings, of which it is not necessary to speak. I have translated Pa, 2 in the past tense, and perhaps the first should also be translated so. Most of it is found in Han Ying, preceded by formally or anciently. Right Chinese letter, forgetting knowledge, the contrast between learning and the Tao. It is only by the Tao that the world can be won. Chihiro Hung commences his quotations of commentary on this chapter with the following cumulative on the second Pa. He puts it away till he has forgotten all that was bad in it. He then puts away all that is fine about him. He does so till he has forgotten all that was good in it. But the bad was wrong, and the good is right. Having diminished the wrong, and also diminished the right, the process is carried on till they are both forgotten. Passion and desire are both cut off, and his virtue and the Tao are in such union that he does nothing. But though he does nothing, he allows all things to do their own doing, and all things are done. Such is a Buddhistic view of the passage, not very intelligible, and which I do not endorse. In a passage in the narratives of the school, BK, Roman 9:2, we have a Confucian view of the passage. Let perspicacity, intelligence, shrewdness, and wisdom be guarded by stupidity, and the service of the possessor will affect the whole world. Let them be guarded by complacence, and his daring and strength will shake the age. Let them be guarded by timidity, and his wealth will be all within the far seas. Let them be guarded by humility, and there will be what we call the method of diminishing it, and diminishing it again. But neither do I endorse this. My own view of the scope of the chapter has been given above in a few words. The greater part of it is found in Chuang Tizu, Right Chinese letter, the quality of indulgence. The chapter shows how that quality enters largely into the dealing of the sage with other men and exercises over them a transforming influence, dominated as it is in him by the Tao. My version of Pa. 1 is taken from Dr. Chalmers. A good commentary on it was given by the last emperor, but one of the earlier of the two great Sung dynasties, in the period AD 1111-1117. The mind of the sage is free from preoccupation and able to receive, still, and able to respond. In Pa 2 I adopt the reading of Chinese letter, to get, instead of the more common Chinese letter, virtue, or quality. There is a passage in Han Ying, Roman 9 3b, 4a, the style of which, most readers will probably agree with me in thinking, was molded on the text before us, though nothing is said of any connection between it and the saying of Laozi. I must regard it as a sequel to the conversation between Confucius and some of his disciples about the principle, Lao's principle, that injury should be recompensed with kindness, as recorded in the Con. Anna, Roman 1436. We read, Tzu Lu said, when men are good to me, I will also be good to them. When they are not good to me, I will also be not good to them. Tzu Kung said, when men are good to me, I will also be good to them. When they are not good to me, I will simply lead them on, forwards it may be or backwards. Yen Hui said, when men are good to me, I will also be good to them. When they are not good to me, I will still be good to them. The views of the three disciples being thus different, they referred the point to the master, who said, the words of Tzu Lu are such as might be expected among the wild tribes of the Man and the Mo, those of Tzu Kung, such as might be expected among friends, those of Hui, such as might be expected among relatives and near connections. This is all. The master was still far from Laozi's standpoint, and that of his own favorite disciple, Yen Hui. Right Chinese letter, the value set on life. The chapter sets forth the Tao as an antidote against decay and death. In Pa, one life is presented to us as intermediate between two non-existences. The words will suggest to many readers those in Job 121. In Pa's 2 and 3, I translate the characters Chinese letter by 3 and 10, instead of by 13, as Julian and other translators have done. The characters are susceptible of either translation according to the tone in which we read the Chinese letter. They were construed as I have done by Wang Pai, and many of the best commentators have followed in his wake. The ministers of life to themselves would be those who eschewed all things, both internal and external, tending to injure health. The ministers of death, those who pursued causes likely to cause disease and shorten life. The third three would be those who thought that by mysterious and abnormal causes they could prolong life, but only injured it. Those three classes being thus disposed of, there remains only 1 in 10 rightly using the Tao, and he is spoken of in the next paragraph. This Pa 4 is easy of translation, and the various readings in it are unimportant, differing in this respect from those in Pa 3. But the aim of the author in it is not clear. In ascribing such effects to the possession of the Tao, is he trifling, as Dr. Chalmers thinks, or indulging the play of his poetical fancy, or simply saying that the Taoist will keep himself out of danger? Right Chinese letter, the operation of the Tao in nourishing things. The subject of the chapter is the quiet, passionless operation of the Tao in nature, in the production and nourishing of things throughout the seasons of the year, a theme dwelt on by Laozi in Roman 2 x 3 and other places. The Tao is the subject of all the predicates in Pa 1, and what seem the subjects in all but the first member should be construed adverbially. On Pa 2, Wu Xiechang says that the honor of the Son of Heaven is derived from his appointment by God, and that then the nobility of the feudal princes is derived from him. But in the honor given to the Tao, and the nobility ascribed to its operation, we are not to think of any external ordination. There is a strong reading of 2 of the members of Pa 3 in Wang Pai, viz. Chinese letter, for Chinese letter, Chinese letter. This is quoted and predicated of heaven, in the Nestorian monument of Xian in the 8th century. Right Chinese letter, returning to the source. The meaning of the chapter is obscure, and the commentators give little help in determining it. As in the preceding chapter, Laozi treats of the operation of the Tao on material things. He seems in this to go on to the operation of it in man, or how he, with his higher nature, should ever be maintaining it in himself. For the understanding of paragraph 1 we must refer to the first chapter of the treatise, where the Tao, having no name, appears as the beginning or first cause of the world, and then, having a name, as its mother. It is the same thing or concept in both of its phases, the ideal or absolute, and the manifestation of it in its passionless doings. The old Jesuit translators render this by mundus principium et causam suum habet in divino Chinese letter su action divini sapientiae qui disi potest ejus meta. So far I may assume that they agreed with me in understanding that the subject of the was the Tao. 2 lays down the law of life for man thus derived from the Tao. The last clause of it is given by the same translators as equivalent to unda fit ut post mortem nihil itimendum sit, a meaning which the characters will not bear. But from that clause, and the next I am obliged to conclude that even in Laozi's mind there was the germ of sublimation of the material frame which issued in the asceticism and life-preserving arts of the later Taoism. 3 seems to indicate the method of guarding the mother in man, by watching over the breath, the protoplastic one of ch. 42, the ethereal matter out of which all material things were formed. The organs of this breath in man are the mouth and nostrils. Nothing else should be understood here by Chinese letter and Chinese letter. See the explanations of the former in the last of the 5th of the appendixes to the Yi in vol. Roman 16p. 432, and the management of the breath is the mystery of the esoteric Buddhism and Taoism. In 4, the guarding what is soft is derived from the use of the soft lips in hiding and preserving the hard and strong teeth. 5 gives the gist of the chapter. Man's always keeping before him the ideal of the Tao, and without purpose, simply doing whatever he finds to do, Tao-like and powerful in all his sphere of action. I have followed the reading of the lost character but one, which is given by Chiro Hung instead of that found in Hoshang Kung and Wang Pai. Right Chinese letter, increase of evidence. The chapter contrasts government by the Tao with that conducted in a spirit of ostentation and by oppression. In the eye of paragraph 1, does Laozi speak of himself? I think he does. Wu Xiechang understands it of any man, i.e. anyone in the exercise of government, which is possible. What is peculiar to my version is the pregnant meaning given to Chinese letter, common enough in the mouth of Confucius. I have adopted it here because of a passage in Liu H. Xiang's Shuo Yuan, Roman 2013b, where Laozi is made to say, excessive is the difficulty of practicing the Tao at the present time, adding that the princes of his age would not receive it from him. On the Great Tao, see chapter 25, 34, et al., from the 20th book of Han Fei, 12b and 13a. I conclude that he had the whole of this chapter in his copy of our Ching, but he broke it up, after his fashion, into fragmentary utterances, confused and confounding. He gives also some remarkable various readings, one of which Chinese letter, instead of Hoshang Kung and Wang Pai's Chinese letter, character 48, is now generally adopted. The passage is quoted in the K letter 2BD ANGHSI dictionary under Chinese letter with this reading. Right Chinese letter, the cultivation of the Tao, and the observation of its effects. The sentiment of the first paragraph is found in the 27th and other previous chapters, that the noiseless and imperceptible acting of the Tao is irresistible in its influence, and this runs through to the end of the chapter, with the additional appeal to the influence of its effects. The introduction of the subject of sacrifices, a religious rite, though not presented to the highest object, will strike the reader as peculiar in our Ching. The Te mentioned 5 times in Pa. 2 is the virtue of the Tao embodied in the individual and extending from him in all the spheres of his occupation, and is explained differently by Han Fei according to its application, and his example I have to some extent followed. The Foss of Pause, 3 and 4 is well given by Hoshang Kung. On the first clause he says, take the person of one who cultivates the Tao, and compare it with that of one who does not cultivate it, which is in a state of decay, and which is in a state of preservation. Right Chinese letter, the mysterious charm, meaning, apparently, the entire passivity of the Tao. With pause, 1 and 2, compare what is said about the infant in chapters 10 and 20, and about the immunity from dangers such as here described of the disciples of the Tao in ch. 50. My evil, in the second triplet of Pa. 3 has been translated by Felicity, but a reference to the K letter 2BD ANGHSI dictionary will show that the meaning which I give to Chinese letter is well authorized. It is the only meaning allowable here. The third and fourth Chinese letter in this pa appear in Hoshang Kung's text as Chinese letter, and he comments on the clauses accordingly, but Chinese letter is now the received reading. Some light is thrown on this paragraph, and the next by an apocryphal conversation attributed to Laozi in Liu H. Xiang's Shuo Yuan, X 4a, Right Chinese letter, the mysterious excellence. The chapter gives us a picture of the man of Tao, humble and retiring, oblivious of himself and of other men, the noblest man under heaven. Pa. 1 is found in Chuang Tizu, Roman 1320b, not expressly mentioned as taken from Laozi, but at the end of a string of sentiments ascribed to the master, some of them, like the two claws here, no doubt belonging to him, and the others, probably Chuang Tizu's own. Pa. 2 is all found in chapters 4 and 52, excepting the short clause in the conclusion. Right Chinese letter, the genuine influence. The chapter shows how government by the Tao is alone effective and of universal application, contrasting it with the failure of other methods. After the weapons of war in Pa. 1, one is tempted to take the sharp implements in Pa. 2 as such weapons, but the meaning which I finally adopted, especially after studying chapters 36 and 80, seems more consonant with Laozi's scheme of thought. In the last member of the same Pa, Hoshang Kung has the strange reading of Chinese letter, and uses it in his commentary, but the better text of Chinese letter is found both in Huainan and Suma ch letter 2bdien, and in Wang Pai. We do not know if the writer were quoting any particular sage in Pa. 3, or referring generally to the sages of the past, men like the sentence makers of ch. 41. Right Chinese letter, transformation according to circumstances. But this title does not throw light on the meaning of the chapter, nor are we helped to an understanding of it by Han Fei, with his additions and comments, Roman 12:3b, 4b, nor by Huainan with his illustrations, Roman 12:21a-b. The difficulty of it is increased by its being separated from the preceding chapter of which it is really the sequel. It contrasts still further government by the Tao with that, by the method of correction. The sage is the same in both chapters, his character and government both marked by the opposites or contraries, which distinguish the procedure of the Tao, as stated in ch. 40. Right Chinese letter, guarding the Tao. The chapter shows how it is the guarding of the Tao that ensures a continuance of long life, with vigor and success. The abuse of it and other passages in our Ching helped on, I must believe, the later Taoist dreams about the elixir vitae and life-preserving pills. The whole of it, with one or two various readings, is found in Han Fei, vi 4b6a, who speaks twice in his comments of the book. Pa. 1 has been translated, in governing men and in serving heaven, there is nothing like moderation. But by heaven, there is not intended the blue sky above us, nor any personal power above it, but the Tao embodied in our constitution, the heavenly element in our nature. The moderation is the opposite of what we call living fast, burning the candle at both ends. In Pa. 2 I must read Chinese letter, instead of the more common Chinese letter. Its meaning is the same as in Chinese letter in ch. 52, Pa. 5. Tear is not virtue in our common meaning of the term, but the attributes of the Tao, as almost always with Laozi. Right Chinese letter, occupying the throne, occupying it, that is, according to the Tao, noiselessly and purposelessly, so that the people enjoy their lives, free from all molestation seen and unseen. Pa. 1, that is, in the most quiet and easy manner. The whole of the chapter is given and commented on by Han Fei, vi 6a-7b, but very unsatisfactorily. The more one thinks and reads about the rest of the chapter, the more does he agree with the words of Julian. It presents the frequent recurrence of the same characters, and appears as insignificant as it is unintelligible, if we give to the Chinese characters their ordinary meaning. The reader will observe that we have here the second mention of spirits, the mains, Chalmas, the ghosts, Julian, less daemons, ch. 39. Whatever Laozi meant to teach in Pa. 2. He laid in it a foundation for the superstition of the later and present Taoism about the spirits of the dead, such as appeared a few years ago in the tail-cutting scare. Right Chinese letter, the attribute of humility, a favorite theme with Laozi, and the illustration of it from the low-lying stream to which smaller streams flow, is also a favorite subject with him. The language can hardly but recall the words of a greater than Laozi. He that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Write Chinese letter, practicing the Tao. Chinese letter, the value set on the Tao, would have been a more appropriate title. The chapter sets forth that value in various manifestations of it. Pa. 1 for the meaning of Chinese letter, see Confucian Analects, Roman 3 ch. 13. Pa. 2. I am obliged to adopt the reading of the first sentence of this paragraph, given by Hu Ainan. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. See especially his quotation of it in Roman 1810a, as from a superior man, I have not found his reading anywhere else. Pa. 3 is not easily translated or explained. See the rules on presenting offerings at the court of a ruler, or the kind, in vol. Roman 27 of the Sacred Books of the East, p. 84, note 3, and also a narrative in the Tso Chuan under the 33rd year of Duke Hsi. Write Chinese letter, thinking in the beginning. The former of these two characters is commonly misprinted Chinese letter, and this has led Chalmers to mistranslate them by the beginning of grace. The chapter sets forth the passionless method of the Tao, and how the sage accordingly accomplishes his objects easily by forestalling in his measures all difficulties. In Pa. 1 the clauses are indicative and not imperative, and therefore we have to supplement the text in translating in some such way, as I have done. They give us a cluster of aphorisms illustrating the procedure of the Tao, by contraries, and conclude with one, which is the chief glory of Laozi's teaching, though I must think that its value is somewhat diminished by the method in which he reaches it. It has not the prominence in the later teaching of Taoist writers which we should expect, nor is it found, so far as I know, in Chuang Tizu, Han Fei, or Hu Ainan. It is quoted, however, twice by Liu Hsiang. See my note on Pa. 2 of ch. 49. It follows from the whole chapter that the Taoistic, doing nothing, was not an absolute quiescence and inaction, but had a method in it. Write Chinese letter, guarding the minute. The chapter is a continuation and enlargement of the last. Wu Xiechang indeed unites the two, blending them together with some ingenious transpositions and omissions, which is not necessary to discuss. Compare the first part of Pa. 3 with the last part of Pa. 1 ch. 29. Write Chinese letter, pure, unmixed excellence. The chapter shows the powerful and beneficent influence of the Tao in government, in contrast with the applications and contrivances of human wisdom. Compare ch. 19. My simple and ignorant is taken from Julian. More literally the translation would be, to make them stupid. My scourge in Pa. 2 is also after Julian's flayao. Write Chinese letter, putting oneself last. The subject is the power of the Tao, by its display of humility in attracting men. The subject and the way in which it is illustrated are frequent themes in the Ching. See chapters 8, 22, 39, 42, 61, et al. The last sentence of Pa. 3 is found also in ch. 22. There seem to be no quotations from the chapter in Han Fei or Hu Ainan, but Wu Xiecheng quotes passages from Tung Chengshu of the 2nd century BC and Yang H. Seung, BC 53 ad 18, which seem to show that the phraseology of it was familiar to them. The Pharma says, when one places himself in his qualities below others, his person is above them. When he places them behind those of others, his person is before them. The other, men exalt him who humbles himself below them, and give the precedence to him who puts himself behind them. Write Chinese letter, the three precious things. This title is taken from Pa. 2, and suggests to us how the early framer of these titles intended to express by them the subject matter of their several chapters. The three things are the three distinguishing qualities of the possessor of the Tao, the three great moral qualities appearing in its followers, the qualities, we may venture to say, of the Tao itself. The same phrase is now the common designation of Buddhism in China, the Triratna or Ratnatraya, the precious Buddha, the precious law, and the precious priesthood or rather monkhood, or church. Appearing also in the Triesecute Araleta Wanifasevana, or formula of the three refuges, what Dr. Eitel calls the most primitive formula fide of the early Buddhists, introduced before Southern and Northern Buddhism separated. I will not introduce the question of whether Buddhism borrowed this designation of Taoism, after its entrance into China. It is in Buddhism the formula of a peculiar church or religion, in Taoism a rule for the character, or the conduct which the Tao demands from all men. My Tao, in Pa, one is the reading of Wang Pai. Ho Shang Kung's text is simply Chinese letter. Wang Pai's reading is now generally adopted. The concluding sentiment of the chapter is equivalent to the saying of Mencius, Roman 7, Roman 2, Roman 4, 2. If the ruler of a state love benevolence, he will have no enemy under heaven. Heaven is equivalent to the Tao, the cause of events, providence as we should say. Right Chinese letter, matching heaven. The chapter describes the work of the practizer of the Tao as accomplished like that of heaven, without striving or crying. He appears under the figure of a mailed warrior in Chinese letter, of the ancient chariot. The chapter is a sequel of the preceding, and is joined onto it by Wu Xiechang, as is also the next. Right Chinese letter, the use of the mysterious Tao. Such seems to be the meaning of the title. The chapter teaches that, if war were carried on, or rather avoided, according to the Tao, the result would be success. Laozi's own statements appear as so many paradoxes. They are examples of the procedure of the Tao by contraries, or opposites. We do not know who the master of the military art referred to was. Perhaps the author only adopted the style of quotation to express his own sentiments. Right Chinese letter, the difficulty of being rightly known. The Tao comprehends and rules all Laozi's teachings, as the members of a clan were all in the loins of their first father, Chinese letter, and continue to look up to him, and the people of a state are all under the direction of their ruler. Yet the philosopher had to complain of not being known. Laozi's principle and rule or ruler was the Tao. His utterance here is very important. Compare the words of Confucius in the Analects, Roman 14ch. 37, et al. Pa, 2 is twice quoted by Huainan, though his text is not quite the same in both cases. Right Chinese letter, the disease of knowing. Here again we have the Tao working by contraries. In the matter of knowledge, compare Pa 1 with Confucius's account of what knowledge is in the Analects, Roman 2ch. 17. The Pa 1 is found in one place in Huainan, lengthened out by the addition of particles, but the variation is unimportant. In another place, however, he seems to have had the correct text before him. Pa 2 in Han Fei also lengthened out, but with an important variation, Chinese letter for Chinese letter, and I cannot construe his text. His Chinese letter is probably a transcriber's error. Right Chinese letter, loving oneself. This title is taken from the expression in Pa. Fa, and the object of the chapter seems to be to show how such loving should be manifested, and to enforce the lesson by the example of the sage, the true master of the Tao. In Pa 1, the great dread is death, and the things which ought to be feared and may be feared are the indulgences of the appetites and passions, which, if not eschewed, tend to shorten life and accelerate the approach of death. Pause. 2 and 3 are supplementary to 1. For Chinese letter, the second character of Ho Shang Kung's text in Pa 2, Wang Pai reads Chinese letter, which has the same name as the other, and according to the K letter 2BD ANGHC's dictionary, the two characters are interchangeable. I have also followed Wu Xiechang in adopting Chinese letter for the former of the two Chinese letter in Pa 3. Wu adopted this reading from a commentator Liu of Luling. It gives a good meaning, and is supported by the structure of other sentences made on similar lines. In Pa 4, the sage must be the ruler who is a sage, a master of the Tao, the king of Ch. 25. He loves himself, i.e. his life, and takes the right measures to prolong his life, but without any demonstration that he is doing so. The above is, I conceive, the correct explanation of the chapter, but as to the Chinese critics and foreign translators of it, it may be said, quot homines, tot sententiae. In illustration of this, I venture to subjoin what is found on it in the old version of the Jesuit missionaries, which has not been previously printed. Primer explicatio juxter, interprets. Populus, ubi jam principes iram non timit, nihil non audit ut jugum excutiat, risc communis ad extremum discrimen adducita. Ambitio principes non facit terram angustirum, et vectigalium magnitudine allendo populo insufficientum, numquam populus patrii pertisis alias terras querit. Viti si non tidit, nec patriae soli tidibit. Quae sanctus sibi semper attentus potentium suam non ostentat. Quia via si amat, nun si pretiosum facit, vel quia sibi rect consulit nun si talem estimat cujus felicitati, et honori in felices populi unis servia debint, immo potius eam si reputat qui populorum felicitati totum si debit impendia. Ergo allud resecet, istud amplictita. Alier explicatio. Populus si non ita timit principes majestatem, sed facile ad eam excedit, majestas non minuita, immo ad summum pervenit. Vectigalibus terra si non oprimita, sua quisque contentus alias terras non querit, si non vexari populus experita. Vidi si non tidit, nec patriae soli tidibit. Quae sanctus majestatis fastum non affectat, immo similem si ceteris ostendit. Sibi rect consulans, populorum amens, non si pretiosum et inaccessibilum facit. Quidquid ergo timorum incuta potest, hoc evitat. Quod amorum conciliat et benignitatem, si demonstrat hoc elegi et ultro amplictita. Right Chinese letter. Allowing men to take their costs. The chapter teaches that rulers should not be hasty to punish, especially by the infliction of death. Though they may seem to err in leniency, yet heaven does not allow offenders to escape. While heaven hates the ill-doer, yet we must not always conclude from its judgments that everyone who suffers from them is an ill-doer. And the two lines which rhyme and illustrate this point are equivalent to the sentiment in our old book, clouds and darkness are round about him. They are ascribed to Laozi by Li Tzu, VI 7a, but it has been said that they are quoted by him in an entirely different connection. But the same text in two different sermons may be said to be in different connections. In Li Tzu and our Ching, the lines have the same meaning and substantially the same application. Indeed, Chang Chan, of our 4th century, the commentator of Li Tzu, quotes the comment of Wang Pai on this passage, condensing it into, "Who can know the mind of heaven? Only the sage can do so." Right Chinese letter, restraining delusion. The chapter sets forth the inefficiency of capital punishment and warns rulers against the infliction of it. Who is it that superintends the infliction of death? The answer of Ho Shang Kung is very clear. It is heaven, which, dwelling on high and ruling all beneath, takes note of the transgressions of men. There is a slight variation in the readings of the second sentence of Pa 2 in the texts of Ho Shang Kung and Wang Pai, and the reading adopted by Chiro Hung differs a little from them both, but the meaning is the same in them all. This chapter and the next are rightly joined on to the preceding by Wu Xiechang. Right Chinese letter, how greediness injures. The want of the nothing-doing Tao leads to the multiplication of exactions by the government and to the misery of the people, so as to make them think lightly of death. The chapter is a warning for both rulers and people. It is not easy to determine whether rulers, or people or both, are intended in the concluding sentence of Pa 2. Right Chinese letter, a warning against trusting in strength. To trust in one's force is contrary to the Tao, whose strength is more in weakness and humility. In Pa 1 the two characters which I have rendered by, so it is with, all things are found in the texts of both Ho Shang Kung and Wang Pai, but Wu Xiechang and Chiro Hung both reject them. I should also have neglected them, but they are also found in Liu Hxiang's Shuo Wan, X4a, with all the rest of Pa's 1 and 2, as from Laozi. They are an anacolothan, such as is elsewhere found in our Ching, e.g., Chinese letter in ch. 21, Pa 2. The above and below in Pa, Fa seem to be merely a play on the words as capable of meaning more and less honorable. Right Chinese letter, the way of heaven, but the chapter contrasts that way, unselfish and magnanimous, with the way of man, selfish and contracted, and illustrates the point by the method of stringing a bow. This must be seen as it is done in China fully to understand the illustration. I have known great athletes in this country tasked to the utmost of their strength to adjust and bend a large Chinese bow from Peking. The sage of Pa 4 is the king of ch. 25. Compare what is said of him with ch. 2, Pa, Fa, et al. Right Chinese letter, thing to be believed. It is difficult to give a short and appropriate translation of this title. The chapter shows how the most unlikely results follow from action according to the Tao. Pa 1. Water was Laozi's favorite emblem of the Tao. Compare chapters 866 et al., Pa 2. Compare ch. 36 Pa 2, Pa 3. Of course we do not know who the sage was from whom Laozi got the lines of this paragraph. They may suggest to some readers the lines of Burns as they have done to me. This honest man, though so poor, is king o' men for that, but the Taoist of Laozi is a higher ideal than Burns' honest man. Pa. 4 is separated from this chapter and made to begin the next by Wu Xiechang. Right Chinese letter, adherence to bond or covenant. The chapter shows, but by no means clearly, how he who holds fast to the Tao will be better off in the end than he who will rather try to secure his own interests. Pa. 1 presents us with a case which the statements of the chapter are intended to meet. 2 disputants, one good and the other bad, the latter, though apparently reconciled, still retaining a grudge and ready to wreak his dissatisfaction when he has an opportunity. The Chinese letter equals fa. For the good of Pa. 2 is intended to solve the question. The terms of a contract or agreement were inscribed on a slip of wood, which was then divided into 2, each party having one half of it. At the settlement, if the halves perfectly fitted to each other, it was carried through. The one who had the right in the dispute has his part of the agreement, but does not insist on it, and is far-bearing. The other insists on the conditions being even now altered in his favor. The characters by which this last case is expressed are very enigmatical, having reference to the satisfaction of the government dues of Laozi's time, a subject into which it would take much space to go. Pa. 3 decides the question by the action of heaven, which is only another name for the cause of the Tao. Right Chinese letter, standing alone. The chapter sets forth what Laozi conceived the ancient government of simplicity was, and what he would have government in all time to be. He does not use the personal pronoun I as the subject of the thrice-recurring Chinese letter, but it is most natural to suppose that he is himself that subject, and he modestly supposes himself in charge of a little state and a small population. The reader can judge for himself of the consummation that would be arrived at. A people rude and uninstructed, using quipos, abstaining from war and all traveling, kept aloof from intercourse even with their neighbors, and without the appliances of what we call civilization. The text is nearly all found in S. Suma Ch letter 2bdien and Chuang Tizu. The first member of Pa. 1, however, is very puzzling. The old Jesuit translators, Julian, Chalmers, and V. von Strauss, all differ in their views of it. Wu Xiechang and Chiro Hung take what I have now rendered by abilities as meaning implements of agriculture, but their view is based on a custom of the Han dynasty, which is not remote enough for the purpose, and on the suppression, after Wang Pai, of a Chinese letter in Hoshang Kung's text. Right Chinese letter, the manifestation of simplicity. The chapter shows how quietly and effectively the Tao proceeds, and by contraries in a way that only the master of it can understand. The author, says Wu Xiechang, sums up in this the subject matter of the 2 parts of his treatise, showing that in all its 5,000 characters, there is nothing beyond what is here said. Pa. 2 suggests to Dr. Chalmers the well-known lines of Bunyan as an analogue of it. A man there was, though some did count him mad, the more he gave away, the more he had. Wu Xiechang brings together 2 sentences from Chuang Tizu, Roman 33:21b, 22a, written evidently with the characters of this text in mind, which as from a Taoist mint, are a still better analogue, and I venture to put them into rhyme. Amassing but to him a sense of need betrays, he hods not, and thereby his affluence displays. I have paused long over the first pair of contraries in Pa. 3 Chinese letter and Chinese letter. Those 2 characters primarily mean sharpness and wounding by cutting. They are also often used in the sense of being beneficial and being injurious. Contraries, both of them. Which contrary had Laozi in mind? I must think the former, though differing in this from all previous translators. The Jesuit version is, Celestis tau natura ditat omnes, nemini nocet. Julian's, Iliesti utile ox ertas et niler nuit point. Chalmers's, benefits and does not injure. And V. von Strauss's, des Himmels wise ist Wohltun und nicht beschädigen. Right? Tao Te Ching. Imprint this ebook is the product of many hours of hard work by volunteers for standard ebooks, and builds on the hard work of other literature lovers made possible by the public domain. This particular ebook is based on a transcription from Project Gutenberg and on digital scans from Google Books. The source text and artwork in this ebook are believed to be in the United States public domain. That is, they are believed to be free of copyright restrictions in the United States. They may still be copyrighted in other countries, so users located outside of the United States must check their local laws before using this ebook. The creators of, and contributors to, this ebook dedicate their contributions to the worldwide public domain via the terms in the CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication. For full license information, see the uncopyright at the end of this ebook. Standard eBooks is a volunteer-driven project that produces ebook editions of public domain literature using modern typography, technology, and editorial standards, and distributes them free of cost. You can download this and other ebooks carefully produced for true book lovers at Standard Books.org. Part I the Tao that can be trodden is not the enduring and unchanging Tao. The name that can be named is not the enduring and unchanging name. Conceived of as having no name, it is the originator of heaven and earth. Conceived of as having a name, it is the mother of all things. Always without desire we must be found, if its deep mystery we would sound, but if desire always within us be, its outer fringe is all that we shall see. Under these two aspects, it is really the same, but as development takes place, it receives the different names. Together we call them the mystery. Where the mystery is the deepest is the gate of all that is subtle and wonderful. 37 Roman 2 All in the world know the beauty of the beautiful, and in doing this they have the idea of what ugliness is. They all know the skill of the skillful, and in doing this they have the idea of what the want of skill is. So it is that existence and non-existence give birth the one to the idea of the other. That difficulty and ease produce the one, the idea of the other. That length and shortness fashion out the one the figure of the other. That the ideas of height and lowness arise from the contrast of the one with the other. That the musical notes and tones become harmonious through the relation of one with another. And that being before and behind give the idea of one following another. Therefore the sage manages affairs without doing anything, and conveys his instructions without the use of speech. All things spring up, and there is not one which declines to show itself. They grow, and there is no claim made for their ownership. They go through their processes, and there is no expectation of a reward for the results. The work is accomplished, and there is no resting in it, as an achievement. The work is done, but how no one can see. 'Tis this that makes the power not cease to be. 38 Roman 3 Not to value and employ men of superior ability is the way to keep the people from rivalry among themselves. Not to prize articles which are difficult to procure is the way to keep them from becoming thieves. Not to show them what is likely to excite their desires is the way to keep their minds from disorder. Therefore the sage, in the exercise of his government, empties their minds, fills their bellies, weakens their wills, and strengthens their bones. He constantly tries to keep them without knowledge and without desire, and where there are those who have knowledge, to keep them from presuming to act on it. When there is this abstinence from action, good order is universal. 39 Roman for the Tao is like the emptiness of a vessel, and in our employment of it, we must be on our guard against all fullness. How deep and unfathomable it is, as if it were the honored ancestor of all things. We should blunt our sharp points and unravel the complications of things. We should attemper our brightness and bring ourselves into agreement with the obscurity of others. How pure and still the Tao is, as if it would ever so continue? I do not know whose son it is. It might appear to have been before God. 40 v Heaven and earth do not act from the impulse of any wish to be benevolent. They deal with all things as the dogs of grass are dealt with. The sages do not act from any wish to be benevolent. They deal with the people as the dogs of grass are dealt with. May not the space between heaven and earth be compared to a bellows? 'Tis emptied, yet it loses not its power. 'Tis moved again, and sends forth ere the maw. Much speech to swift exhaustion lead we see. You're in a being God, and keep it free. 41 vi the valley spirit dies not, I the same. The female mystery thus do we name. Its gate, from which at first they issued forth, is called the root from which grew heaven and earth. Long and unbroken does its power remain, used gently, and without the touch of pain. 42 Romans 7 Heaven is long, enduring, and earth continues long. The reason why heaven and earth are able to endure and continue thus long is because they do not live of, or for themselves. This is how they are able to continue and endure. Therefore the sage puts his own person last, and yet it is found in the foremost place. He treats his person as if it were foreign to him, and yet that person is preserved. Is it not because he has no personal and private ends, that therefore such ends are realized? 43 Roman 8 The highest excellence is like that of water. The excellence of water appears in its benefiting all things, and in its occupying, without striving, to the contrary, the low place which all men dislike. Hence, its way is near to that of the Tao. The excellence of a residence is in the suitability of the place, that of the mind is in abysmal stillness, that of associations is in their being with the virtuous, that of government is in its securing good order, that of the conduct of affairs is in its ability, and that of the initiation of any movement is in its timeliness. And when one with the highest excellence does not wrangle about his low position, no one finds fault with him. Fa Roman 9, it is better to leave a vessel unfilled than to attempt to carry it when it is full. If you keep feeling a point that has been sharpened, the point cannot long preserve its sharpness. When gold and jade fill the hall, their possessor cannot keep them safe. When wealth and honors lead to arrogancy, this brings its evil on itself. When the work is done, and one's name is becoming distinguished, to withdraw into obscurity is the way of heaven. 5x. When the intelligent and animal souls are held together in one embrace, they can be kept from separating. When one gives undivided attention to the vital breath and brings it to the utmost degree of pliancy, he can become as a tender babe. When he has cleansed away the most mysterious sights of his imagination, he can become without a flaw. In loving the people and ruling the state, cannot he proceed without any purpose of action? In the opening and shutting of his gates of heaven, cannot he do so as a female bird? While his intelligence reaches in every direction, cannot he appear to be without knowledge? The Tao produces all things and nourishes them. It produces them and does not claim them as its own. It does all, and yet does not boast of it. It presides over all, and yet does not control them. This is what is called the mysterious quality of the Tao. 6 Roman 11, the 30 spokes unite in the one nave, but it is on the empty space for the axle that the use of the wheel depends. Clay is fashioned into vessels, but it is on their empty hollowness that their use depends. The door and windows are cut out from the walls to form an apartment, but it is on the empty space within that its use depends. Therefore, what has a positive existence serves for profitable adaptation, and what has not that for actual usefulness. 7 Roman 12 colors 5 hues from this their sight will take. Music's 5 notes the ears as deaf can make. The flavors 5 deprive the mouth of taste. The chariot costs and the wild hunting waste make mad the mind, and objects rare and strange sought for, men's conduct will to evil change. Therefore the sage seeks to satisfy the craving of the belly, and not the insatiable longing of the eyes. He puts from him the latter, and prefers to seek the former. 8 Roman 13 favor and disgrace would seem equally to be feared. Honor and great calamity to be regarded as personal conditions of the same kind. What is meant by speaking thus of favor and disgrace? Disgrace is being in a low position after the enjoyment of favor. The getting that favor leads to the apprehension of losing it, and the losing it leads to the fear of still greater calamity. This is what is meant by saying that favor and disgrace would seem equally to be feared. And what is meant by saying that honor and great calamity are to be, similarly, regarded as personal conditions. What makes me liable to great calamity is my having the body, which I call myself. If I had not the body, what great calamity could come to me? Therefore he who would administer the kingdom, honoring it as he honors his own person, may be employed to govern it, and he who would administer it with the love which he bears to his own person may be entrusted with it. 9 Roman 14 we look at it, and we do not see it, and we name it the eckable. We listen to it, and we do not hear it, and we name it the inaudible. We try to grasp it, and do not get hold of it, and we name it the subtle. With these 3 qualities it cannot be made the subject of description, and hence we blend them together and obtain the one. Its upper part is not bright, and its lower part is not obscure. Ceaseless in its action, it yet cannot be named, and then it again returns and becomes nothing. This is called the form of the formless, and the semblance of the invisible. This is called the fleeting and indeterminable. We meet it and do not see its front, we follow it, and do not see its back. When we can lay hold of the Tao of old to direct the things of the present day, and are able to know it as it was of old in the beginning, this is called unwinding. The clue of Tao. 50 Roman 15, the skillful masters of the Tao, in old times, with a subtle and exquisite penetration, comprehended its mysteries, and were deep, also, so as to elude men's knowledge. As they were thus beyond men's knowledge, I will make an effort to describe of what sort they appeared to be. Shrinking looked they like those who wade through a stream in winter, irresolute like those who are afraid of all around them, grave like a guest in awe of his host, evanescent like ice that is melting away, unpretentious like wood that has not been fashioned into anything, vacant like a valley, and dull like muddy water. Who can make the muddy water clear? Let it be still, and it will gradually become clear. Who can secure the condition of rest? Let movement go on, and the condition of rest will gradually arise. They who preserve this method of the Tao do not wish to be full of themselves. It is through their not being full of themselves that they can afford to seem wan and not appear new and complete. 51 Romans 16. The state of vacancy should be brought to the utmost degree, and that of stillness guarded with unwearying vigor. All things alike go through their processes of activity, and then we see them return to their original state. When things in the vegetable world have displayed their luxuriant growth, we see each of them return to its root. This returning to their root is what we call the state of stillness, and that stillness may be called a reporting that they have fulfilled their appointed end. The report of that fulfillment is the regular, unchanging rule. To know that unchanging rule is to be intelligent. Not to know it leads to wild movements and evil issues. The knowledge of that unchanging rule produces a grand capacity and forbearance, and that capacity and forbearance lead to a community of feeling with all things. From this community of feeling comes a kingliness of character, and he who is king-like goes on to be heaven-like. In that likeness to heaven he possesses the Tao. Possessed of the Tao, he endures long, and to the end of his bodily life is exempt from all danger of decay. 52 Romans 17. In the highest antiquity, the people did not know that there were their rulers. In the next age they loved them and praised them. In the next they feared them, in the next they despised them. Thus it was that when faith in the Tao was deficient in the rulers, a want of faith in them ensued in the people. How irresolute did those earliest rulers appear, showing by their reticence the importance which they set upon their words. Their work was done and their undertakings were successful, while the people all said, "We are as we are of ourselves." 53 Roman 18. When the great Tao way or method ceased to be observed, benevolence and righteousness came into vogue. Then appeared wisdom and shrewdness, and there ensued great hypocrisy. When harmony no longer prevailed throughout the 6 kinships, filial sons found their manifestation. When the states and clans fell into disorder, loyal ministers appeared. 54 Roman 19. If we could renounce our sageness and discard our wisdom, it would be better for the people 100-fold. If we could renounce our benevolence and discard our righteousness, the people would again become filial and kindly. If we could renounce our artful contrivances and discard our scheming for gain, there would be no thieves nor robbers. Those 3 methods of government thought olden ways in elegance did fail, and made these names their one of worth to veil. But simple views, and causes plain and true with selfish ends and many lusts. Issue. 55 Roman 20. When we renounce learning we have no troubles. The ready, yes, and flattering, yeah, small is the difference they display, but mock their issues, good and ill. What space the gulf between shall fill? What all men fear is indeed to be feared, but how wide and without end is the range of questions asking to be discussed. The multitude of men look satisfied and pleased, as if enjoying a full banquet, as if mounted on a tower in spring. I alone seem listless and still, my desires having as yet given no indication of their presence. I am like an infant which has not yet smiled. I look dejected and fall on, as if I had no home to go to. The multitude of men all have enough and to spare. I alone seem to have lost everything. My mind is that of a stupid man, I am in a state of chaos. Ordinary men look bright and intelligent, while I alone seem to be benighted. They look full of discrimination, while I alone am dull and confused. I seem to be carried about as on the sea, drifting as if I had nowhere to rest. All men have their spheres of action, while I alone seem dull and incapable, like a rude borderer. Thus, I alone am different from other men, but I value the nursing mother. The Tao. 56 Roman 21. The grandest forms of active force from Tao come, their only sauce. Who can of Tao the nature tell? Our sight it flies, our touch as well. Eluding sight, eluding touch, the forms of things all in it crouch. Eluding touch, eluding sight, there are their semblances, all right. Profound it is, dark and obscure, things' essences all there endure. Those essences the truth enfold of what, when seen, shall then be told. Now it is so, 'twas so of old. Its name, what passes not away, so in their beautiful array, things form and never know decay. How know I that it is so with all the beauties of existing things? By this nature of the Tao, 0.57 Roman 22, the partial becomes complete, the crooked, straight, the empty, full, the worn out, new. He whose desires are few gets them. He whose desires are many goes astray. Therefore the sage holds in his embrace the one thing of humility, and manifests it to all the world. He is free from self-display, and therefore he shines, from self-assertion, and therefore he is distinguished, from self-boasting, and therefore his merit is acknowledged, from self-complacency, and therefore he acquires superiority. It is because he is thus free from striving that therefore no one in the world is able to strive with him. That saying of the ancients that the partial becomes complete was not vainly spoken. All real completion is comprehended under it. 0.58 Roman 23, abstaining from speech mocks him who is obeying the spontaneity of his nature. A violent wind does not last for a whole morning. A sudden rain does not last for the whole day. To whom is it that these two things are owing? To heaven and earth. If heaven and earth cannot make such spasmodic actings last long, how much less can man? Therefore, when one is making the Tao his business, those who are also pursuing it agree with him in it, and those who are making the manifestation of its costs their object agree with him in that, while even those who are failing in both these things agree with him where they fail. Hence, those with whom he agrees as to the Tao have the happiness of attaining to it. Those with whom he agrees as to its manifestation have the happiness of attaining to it, and those with whom he agrees in their failure have also the happiness of attaining to the Tao. But when there is not faith sufficient on his part, a want of faith in him ensues on the part of the others. 0.59 Roman 24, he who stands on his tiptoes does not stand firm. He who stretches his legs does not walk easily. So, he who displays himself does not shine. He who asserts his own views is not distinguished. He who vaunts himself does not find his merit acknowledged. He who is self-conceited has no superiority allowed to him. Such conditions, viewed from the standpoint of the Tao, are like remnants of food, or a tumor on the body, which all dislike. Hence those who pursue the costs of the Tao do not adopt and allow them. 0.60 Roman 25, there was something undefined and complete, coming into existence before heaven and earth. How still it was and formless, standing alone and undergoing no change, reaching everywhere and in no danger of being exhausted. It may be regarded as the mother of all things. I do not know its name, and I give it the designation of the Tao the way or costs. Making an effort further to give it a name, I call it the Great. Great, it passes on in constant flow. Passing on, it becomes remote. Having become remote, it returns. Therefore the Tao is great, heaven is great, earth is great, and the sage, king is also great. In the universe there are four that are great, and the sage, king is one of them. Man takes his law from the earth takes its law from heaven takes its law from the Tao. The law of the Tao is its being what it is. 0.61 Roman 26, gravity is the root of lightness, stillness, the ruler of movement. Therefore a wise prince, marching the whole day, does not go far from his baggage wagons. Although he may have brilliant prospects to look at, he quietly remains in his proper place, indifferent to them. How should the lord of a myriad chariots carry himself lightly before the kingdom? If he do act lightly, he has lost his root of gravity. If he proceed to active movement, he will lose his throne. 0.62 Roman 27, the skillful traveler leaves no traces of his wheels or footsteps. The skillful speaker says nothing that can be found fault with or blamed. The skillful reckoner uses no tallies. The skillful closer needs no bolts or bars, while to open what he has shut will be impossible. The skillful binder uses no strings or knots, while to unloose what he has bound will be impossible. In the same way the sage is always skillful at saving men, and so he does not cast away any man. He is always skillful at saving things, and so he does not cast away anything. This is called hiding the light of his procedure. Therefore the man of skill is a master to be looked up to by him who has not the skill, and he who has not the skill is the helper of the reputation of him who has the skill. If the one did not honor his master, and the other did not rejoice in his helper, an observer, though intelligent, might greatly err about them. This is called the utmost degree of mystery. 63 Roman 28, who knows his manhood's strength, yet still his female feebleness maintains. As to one channel flow the many drains, all come to him, yea, all beneath the sky. Thus he the constant excellence retains, the simple child again, free from all stains. Who knows how white attracts, yet always keeps himself within black shade, the pattern of humility displayed in view of all beneath the sky. He in the unchanging excellence arrayed, endless return to man's first state has made. Who knows how glory shines, yet loves disgrace, nor e'er for it is pale. Behold his presence in a spacious vale, to which men come from all beneath the sky. The unchanging excellence completes its tale, the simple infant man in him we hail. The unwrought material, when divided and distributed, forms vessels. The sage, when employed, becomes the head of all the offices of government, and in his greatest regulations he employs no violent measures. 6 Roman 29, if anyone should wish to get the kingdom for himself, and to effect this by what he does, I see that he will not succeed. The kingdom is a spirit-like thing, and cannot be got by active doing. He who would so win it destroys it, he who would hold it in his grasp loses it. The cost and nature of things is such that what was in front is now behind. What warmed anon we freezing find. Strength is of weakness oft the spoil, the store in ruins mocks our toil. Hence the sage puts away excessive effort, extravagance, and easy indulgence. 65 XXX. He who would assist a lot of men in harmony with the Tao will not assert his mastery in the kingdom by force of arms. Such a cost is sure to meet with its proper return. Wherever a host is stationed, briars and thorns spring up. In the sequence of great armies there are sure to be bad years. A skillful commander strikes a decisive blow and stops. He does not dare, by continuing his operations, to assert and complete his mastery. He will strike the blow, but will be on his guard against being vain or boastful or arrogant in consequence of it. He strikes it as a matter of necessity. He strikes it, but not from a wish for mastery. When things have attained their strong maturity, they become old. This may be said to be not in accordance with the Tao. And what is not in accordance with it soon comes to an end. 66 Roman 31. Now arms, however beautiful, are instruments of evil omen, hateful, it may be said, to all creatures. Therefore they who have the Tao do not like to employ them. The superior man ordinarily considers the left hand the most honorable place, but in time of war the right hand. Those sharp weapons are instruments of evil omen, and not the instruments of the superior man. He uses them only on the compulsion of necessity. Calm and repose are what he prizes. Victory, by force of arms, is to him undesirable. To consider this desirable would be to delight in the slaughter of men, and he who delights in the slaughter of men cannot get his will in the kingdom. On occasions of festivity to be on the left hand is the prized position. On occasions of mourning, the right hand. The second in command of the army has his place on the left. The general commanding in chief has his on the right. His place, that is assigned to him as in the rites of mourning. He who has killed multitudes of men should weep for them with the bitterest grief, and the victor in battle has his place rightly. According to those rites. 67 Roman 32, the Tao, considered as unchanging, has no name. Though in its primordial simplicity it may be small, the whole world dares not deal with one embodying it as a minister. If a feudal prince or the king could guard and hold it, all would spontaneously submit themselves to him. Heaven and earth, under its guidance, unite together and send down the sweet dew, which, without the directions of men, reaches equally everywhere as of its own accord. As soon as it proceeds to action, it has a name. When it once has that name, men can know to rest in it. When they know to rest in it, they can be free from all risk of failure and error. The relation of the Tao to all the world is like that of the great rivers and seas to the streams from the valleys. 68 Roman 33. He who knows other men is discerning. He who knows himself is intelligent. He who overcomes others is strong. He who overcomes himself is mighty. He who is satisfied with his lot is rich. He who goes on acting with energy has a firm will. He who does not fail in the requirements of his position continues long. He who dies and yet does not perish has longevity. 69 Roman 30. For all-pervading is the great Tao. It may be found on the left hand and on the right. All things depend on it for their production, which it gives to them, not one refusing obedience to it. When its work is accomplished, it does not claim the name of having done it. It clothes all things as with a garment, and makes no assumption of being their lord. It may be named in the smallest things. All things return to their root and disappear, and do not know that it is it which presides over their doing so. It may be named in the greatest things. Hence the sage is able in the same way to accomplish his great achievements. It is through his not making himself great that he can accomplish them. 70 Roman 35 To him, who holds in his hands the great image of the invisible Tao, the whole world repairs. Men resort to him, and receive no hurt, but find rest, peace, and the feeling of ease. Music and dainties will make the passing guest stop for a time. But though the Tao as it comes from the mouth seems insipid and has no flavor, though it seems not worth being looked at or listened to, the use of it is inexhaustible. 71 Roman 36. When one is about to take an inspiration, he is sure to make a previous expiration. When he is going to weaken another, he will first strengthen him. When he is going to overthrow another, he will first have raised him up. When he is going to despoil another, he will first have made gifts to him. This is called hiding the light of his procedure. The soft overcomes the hard, and the weak the strong. Fishes should not be taken from the deep. Instruments for the profit of a state should not be shown to the people. 72 Roman 37. The Tao in its regular course does nothing for the sake of doing it, and so there is nothing which it does not do. If princes and kings were able to maintain it, all things would of themselves be transformed by them. If this transformation became to me an object of desire, I would express the desire by the nameless simplicity. Simplicity without a name is free from all external aim. With no desire, at rest and still, all things go right as of their will. 73 Pot Roman 2 Roman 38. Those who, possessed in highest degree the attributes of the Tao, did not seek to show them, and therefore they possessed them in fullest measure. Those who possessed in a lower degree those attributes sought how not to lose them, and therefore they did not possess them in fullest measure. Those who possessed in the highest degree those attributes did nothing with a purpose, and had no need to do anything. Those who possessed them in a lower degree were always doing, and had need to be so doing. Those who possessed the highest benevolence were always seeking to carry it out, and had no need to be doing so. Those who possessed the highest righteousness were always seeking to carry it out, and had need to be so doing. Those who possessed the highest sense of propriety were always seeking to show it, and when men did not respond to it, they bared the arm and marched up to them. Thus it was that when the Tao was lost, its attributes appeared. When its attributes were lost, benevolence appeared. When benevolence was lost, righteousness appeared. And when righteousness was lost, the proprieties appeared. Now propriety is the attenuated form of lightheartedness and good faith, and is also the commencement of disorder. Swift apprehension is only a flower of the Tao, and is the beginning of stupidity. Thus it is that the great man abides by what is solid, and eschews what is flimsy, dwells with the fruit and not with the flower. It is thus that he puts away the one and makes choice of the other. 7 Far Roman 39. The things which from of old have got the one, the Tao, heaven which by it is bright and pure. Earth rendered thereby firm and sure. Spirits with powers by it supplied. Valleys kept full throughout their void. All creatures which through it do live. Princes and kings who from it get the model which to all they give. All these are the results of the one Tao. If heaven were not thus pure, it soon would rend. If earth were not thus sure, 'twould break and bend. Without these powers, the spirit soon would fail. If not so filled, the drought would parch each vale. Without that life, creatures would pass away. Princes and kings, without that moral sway, however grand and high, would all decay. Thus it is that dignity finds its firm root in its previous meanness, and what is lofty finds its stability in the lowness from which it rises. Hence princes and kings call themselves orphans, men of small virtue, and as carriages without a nave. Is not this an acknowledgment that in their considering themselves mean they see the foundation of their dignity? So it is that, in the enumeration of the different parts of a carriage, we do not come on what makes it answer the ends of a carriage. They do not wish to show themselves elegant-looking as jade, but prefer to be cost-looking as an ordinary stone. 75 XL. The movement of the Tao by contraries proceeds, and weakness mocks the cost of Tao's mighty deeds. All things under heaven sprang from it as existing, and named, that existence sprang from it as non-existent, and not named. 76 Roman 41. Scholars of the highest class, when they hear about the Tao, earnestly carry it into practice. Scholars of the middle class, when they have heard about it, seem now to keep it and now to lose it. Scholars of the lowest class, when they have heard about it, laugh greatly at it. If it were not thus laughed at, it would not be fit to be the Tao. Therefore the sentence-makers have thus expressed themselves. The Tao, when brightest seen, seems light to lack. Who progress in it makes, seems drawing back. Its even way is like a rugged track. Its highest virtue from the veil doth rise. Its greatest beauty seems to offend the eyes, and he is most whose lot the least supplies. Its firmest virtue seems but poor and low. Its solid truth seems change to undergo. Its largest square doth yet no corner show a vessel great. It is the slowest made. Loud is its sound, but never word it said. A semblance great, the shadow of a shade. The Tao is hidden and has no name, but it is the Tao which is skillful at imparting to all things what they need, and making them complete. 77 Roman 42, the Tao produced one. One produced two produced three produced all things. All things leave behind them the obscurity out of which they have come, and go forward to embrace the brightness into which they have emerged, while they are harmonized by the breath of vacancy. What men dislike is to be orphans, to have little virtue, to be as carriages without naves, and yet these are the designations which kings and princes use for themselves. So it is that some things are increased by being diminished, and others are diminished by being increased. What other men, thus, teach, I also teach. The violent and strong do not die their natural death. I will make this the basis of my teaching. 78 Roman 43. The softest thing in the world dashes against and overcomes the hardest. That which has no substantial existence enters where there is no crevice. I know hereby what advantage belongs to doing nothing with a purpose. There are few in the world who attain to the teaching without words, and the advantage arising from non-action. 79 Roman 44 of fame or life. Which do you hold more dear? Of life or wealth, to which would you adhere? Keep life and lose those other things. Keep them and lose your life, which brings sorrow and pain more near. Thus we may see, who cleaves to fame rejects what is more great, who loves large stars gives up the rich estate. Who is content needs fear no shame. Who knows to stop incurs no blame. From danger free long lives shall he. 80 Roman 45. Who thinks his great achievements poor shall find his vigor long endure. Of greatest fullness, deemed a void, exhaustion ne'er shall stem the tide. Do thou what's straight still crooked deem, thy greatest art still stupid seem, and eloquence a stammering scream. Constant action overcomes cold, being still overcomes heat. Purity and stillness give the correct law to all under heaven. 81 Roman 46. When the Tao prevails in the world, they send back their swift horses to draw the dung carts. When the Tao is disregarded in the world, the war horses breed in the borderlands. There is no guilt greater than to sanction ambition, no calamity greater than to be discontented with one's lot, no fault greater than the wish to be getting. Therefore the sufficiency of contentment is an enduring and unchanging sufficiency. 82 Roman 47. Without going outside his door, one understands all that takes place under the sky. Without looking out from his window, one sees the Tao of heaven. The farther that one goes out from himself, the less he knows. Therefore the sages got their knowledge without traveling, gave their right names to things without seeing them, and accomplished their ends without any purpose of doing so. 83 Roman 48. He who devotes himself to learning seeks from day to day to increase his knowledge. He who devotes himself to the Tao seeks from day to day to diminish his doing. He diminishes it and again diminishes it, till he arrives at doing nothing on purpose. Having arrived at this point of non-action, there is nothing which he does not do. He who gets as his own all under heaven does so by giving himself no trouble with that end. If one take trouble with that end, he is not equal to getting as his own all under heaven. 84 Roman 49. The sage has no invariable mind of his own, he makes the mind of the people his mind. To those who are good to me, I am good, and to those who are not good to me, I am also good, and thus all get to be good. To those who are sincere with me, I am sincere, and to those who are not sincere with me, I am also sincere, and thus all get to be sincere. The sage has in the world an appearance of indecision and keeps his mind in a state of indifference to all. The people all keep their eyes and ears directed to him, and he deals with them all as his children. 85 L men come forth and live, they enter again and die. Of every 10 3 are ministers of life to themselves, and 3 are ministers of death. There are also 3 in every 10 whose aim is to live, but whose movements tend to the land, or place, of death. And for what reason? Because of their excessive endeavors to perpetuate life. But I have heard that he who is skillful in managing the life entrusted to him for a time travels on the land without having to shun rhinoceros or tiger, and enters a host without having to avoid buff coat or sharp weapon. The rhinoceros finds no place in him into which to thrust its horn, nor the tiger a place in which to fix its claws, nor the weapon a place to admit its point. And for what reason? Because there is in him no place of death. 86 Li. All things are produced by the Tao, and nourished by its outflowing operation. They receive their forms according to the nature of each, and are completed according to the circumstances of their condition. Therefore all things without exception honor the Tao, and exalt its outflowing operation. This honoring of the Tao and exalting of its operation is not the result of any ordination, but always a spontaneous tribute. Thus it is that the Tao produces all things, nourishes them, brings them to their full growth, nurses them, completes them, matures them, maintains them, and overspreads them. It produces them and makes no claim to the possession of them. It carries them through their processes and does not vaunt its ability in doing so. It brings them to maturity and exercises no control over them. This is called its mysterious operation. 87 Lii. The Tao, which originated all under the sky, is to be considered as the mother of them all. When the mother is found, we know what her children should be. When one knows that he is his mother's child and proceeds to God, the qualities of the mother that belong to him, to the end of his life he will be free from all peril. Let him keep his mouth closed and shut up the portals of his nostrils, and all his life he will be exempt from laborious exertion. Let him keep his mouth open and spend his breath in the promotion of his affairs, and all his life there will be no safety for him. The perception of what is small is the secret of clear-sightedness. The guarding of what is soft and tender is the secret of strength. Who uses well his light, reverting to its source so bright, will from his body ward all blight, and hides the unchanging from men's sight. 88 Lii. If I were suddenly to become known, and put into a position to conduct a government, according to the great Tao, what I should be most afraid of would be a boastful display. The great Tao away is very level and easy, but people love the byways. Their cot, yards, and buildings shall be well kept, but their fields shall be ill cultivated, and their granaries very empty. They shall wear elegant and ornamented robes, carry a sharp sword at their girdle, pamper themselves in eating and drinking, and have a superabundance of property and wealth. Such princes may be called robbers and boasters. This is contrary to the Tao surely. 89 Live what Tao's skillful planter plants can never be upton, what his skillful arms enfold from him can ne'er be born. Sons shall bring in lengthening line, sacrifices to his shrine. Tao when nursed within oneself, his vigor will make true, and where the family it rules what riches will accrue? The neighborhood where it prevails in thriving will abound, and when 'tis seen throughout the state, good fortune will be found. Employ it the kingdom awe, and men thrive all around. In this way the effect will be seen in the person, by the observation of different cases, in the family, in the neighborhood, in the state, and in the kingdom. How do I know that this effect is sure to hold thus all under the sky? By this method of observation. 90 LV. He who has in himself abundantly the attributes of the Tao is like an infant. Poisonous insects will not sting him, fierce beasts will not seize him, birds of prey will not strike him. The infant's bones are weak and its sinews soft, but yet its grasp is firm. It knows not yet the union of male and female, and yet its virile member may be excited, showing the perfection of its physical essence. All day long it will cry without its throat becoming hoarse, showing the harmony in its constitution. To him by whom this harmony is known, the secret of the unchanging Tao is shown, and in the knowledge wisdom finds its throne. All life-increasing arts to evil turn, where the mind makes the vital breath to burn. False is the strength, and o'er it we should mourn. When things have become strong, they then become old, which may be said to be contrary to the Tao. Whatever is contrary to the Tao soon ends. 91 LVI. He who knows the Tao does not care to speak about it. He who is ever ready to speak about it does not know it. He who knows it will keep his mouth shut and close the portals of his nostrils. He will blunt his sharp points and unravel the complications of things. He will attemper his brightness and bring himself into agreement with the obscurity of others. This is called the mysterious agreement. Such an one cannot be treated familiarly or distantly. He is beyond all consideration of profit or injury, of nobility or meanness. He is the noblest man under heaven. 92 LVI. A state may be ruled by measures of correction. Weapons of war may be used with crafty dexterity, but the kingdom is made one's own only by freedom from action and purpose. How do I know that it is so? By these facts. In the kingdom, the multiplication of prohibitive enactments increases the poverty of the people. The more implements to add to their profit that the people have, the greater disorder is there in the state and clan. The more acts of crafty dexterity that men possess, the more do strange contrivances appear, the more display there is of legislation, the more thieves and robbers there are. Therefore a sage has said, I will do nothing of purpose, and the people will be transformed of themselves. I will be fond of keeping still, and the people will of themselves become correct. I will take no trouble about it, and the people will of themselves become rich. I will manifest no ambition, and the people will of themselves attain to the primitive simplicity. 93 LVAI The government that seems the most unwise, oft goodness to the people best supplies. That which is meddling, touching everything, will work but ill, and disappointment bring. Misery? Happiness is to be found by its side. Happiness? Misery lurks beneath it. Who knows what either will come to in the end? Shall we then dispense with correction? The method of correction shall by a turn become distortion, and the good in it shall by a turn become evil. The delusion of the people on this point has indeed subsisted for a long time. Therefore the sage is like a square which cuts no one with its angles, like a corner which injures no one with its sharpness. He is straightforward but allows himself no license. He is bright but does not dazzle. 94 LIX For regulating the human in our constitution and rendering the proper service to the heavenly, there is nothing like moderation. It is only by this moderation that there is effected an early return to man's normal state. That early return is what I call the repeated accumulation of the attributes of the Tao. With that repeated accumulation of those attributes, there comes the subjugation of every obstacle to such return. Of this subjugation, we know not what shall be the limit, and when one knows not what the limit shall be, he may be the ruler of a state. He who possesses the mother of the state may continue long. His case is like that of the plant, of which we say that its roots are deep, and its flower stalks firm. This is the way to secure that its enduring life shall long be seen. 95 LX Governing a great state is like cooking small fish. Let the kingdom be governed according to the Tao, and the manes of the departed will not manifest their spiritual energy. It is not that those manes have not that spiritual energy, but it will not be employed to hurt men. It is not that it could not hurt men, but neither does the ruling sage hurt them. When these two do not injuriously affect each other, their good influences converge in the virtue of the Tao. 96 LXI What makes a great state is its being like a low-lying, downflowing stream. It becomes the center to which tend all the small states under heaven. To illustrate from the case of all females, the female always overcomes the male by her stillness. Stillness may be considered a sort of abasement. Thus it is that a great state, by condescending to small states, gains them for itself, and that small states, by abasing themselves to a great state, win it over to them. In the one case the abasement leads to gaining adherence, in the other case to procuring favor. The great state only wishes to unite men together and nourish them. A small state only wishes to be received by, and to serve, the other. Each gets what it desires, but the great state must learn to abase itself. 97 LZI Tao has of all things the most honored place. No treasures give good men so rich a grace. Bad men it gods, and doth their ill efface. Its admirable words can purchase honor. Its admirable deeds can raise their performer above others. Even men who are not good are not abandoned by it. Therefore, when the sovereign occupies his place as the son of heaven, and he has appointed his 3 ducal ministers, though a prince were to send in a round symbol of rank large enough to fill both the hands, and that as the precursor of the team of horses in the courtyard, such an offering would not be equal to a lesson of this Tao, which one might present on his knees. Why was it that the ancients prized this Tao so much? Was it not because it could be got by seeking for it, and the guilty could escape from the stain of their guilt by it? This is the reason why all under heaven consider it the most valuable thing. 98 LZI. It is the way of the Tao, to act without thinking of acting, to conduct affairs without feeling the trouble of them, to taste without discerning any flavor, to consider what is small as great and a few as many, and to recompense injury with kindness. The master of it anticipates things that are difficult while they are easy, and does things that would become great while they are small. All difficult things in the world are sure to arise from a previous state in which they were easy, and all great things from one in which they were small. Therefore the sage, while he never does what is great, is able on that account to accomplish the greatest things. He who lightly promises is sure to keep but little faith. He who is continually thinking things easy is sure to find them difficult. Therefore the sage sees difficulty, even in what seems easy, and so never has any difficulties. 99 Lziv, that which is at rest is easily kept hold of. Before a thing has given indications of its presence, it is easy to take measures against it. That which is brittle is easily broken. that which is very small is easily dispersed. Action should be taken before a thing has made its appearance. Order should be secured before disorder has begun. The tree which fills the alms grew from the tiniest sprout. The tower of 9 stories rose from a small heap of earth. The journey of 1,000 li commenced with a single step. He who acts with an ulterior purpose does harm. He who takes hold of a thing in the same way loses his hold. The sage does not act so, and therefore does no harm. He does not lay hold so, and therefore does not lose his bold. But people in their conduct of affairs are constantly ruining them when they are on the eve of success. If they were careful at the end, as they should be, at the beginning they would not so ruin them. Therefore the sage desires what other men do not desire, and does not prize things difficult to get. He learns what other men do not learn, and turns back to what the multitude of men have passed by. Thus he helps the natural development of all things, and does not dare to act, with an ulterior purpose of his own. 100 LXV, the ancients who showed their skill in practicing the Tao did so, not to enlighten the people, but rather to make them simple and ignorant. The difficulty in governing the people arises from their having much knowledge. He who tries to govern a state by his wisdom is a scourge to it, while he who does not try to do so is a blessing. He who knows these 2 things finds in them also his model and rule. Ability to know this model and rule constitutes what we call the mysterious excellence of a governor. Deep and far-reaching is such mysterious excellence, showing indeed its possessor as opposite to others, but leading them to a great conformity to him. 101 LXVI, that whereby the rivers and seas are able to receive the homage and tribute of all the valley streams, is their skill in being lower than they. It is thus that they are the kings of them all. So it is that the sage ruler, wishing to be above men, puts himself by his words below them, and, wishing to be before them, places his person behind them. In this way, though he has his place above them, men do not feel his weight, nor though he has his place before them, do they feel it an injury to them. Therefore all in the world delight to exalt him, and do not weary of him. Because he does not strive, no one finds it possible to strive with him. 102 LXVI, all the world says that, while my Tao is great, it yet appears to be inferior to other systems of teaching. Now it is just its greatness that makes it seem to be inferior. If it were like any other system, for long would its smallness have been known. But I have 3 precious things which I prize and hold fast. The first is gentleness, the second is economy, and the third is shrinking from taking precedence of others. With that gentleness I can be bold, with that economy I can be liberal. Shrinking from taking precedence of others, I can become a vessel of the highest honor. Nowadays they give up gentleness and are all for being bold, economy and are all for being liberal, the hindmost place, and seek only to be foremost, of all which the end is death. Gentleness is sure to be victorious even in battle, and firmly to maintain its ground. Heaven will save its possessor, by his very gentleness protecting him. 103 LXVI, he who in Tao's was has skill assumes no martial pot. He who fights with most good will to rage makes no resort. He who vanquishes yet still keeps from his foes apart. He whose hests men most fulfill yet humbly plies his art. Thus we say, he ne'er contends and therein is his might. Thus we say, men's wills he bends that they with him unite. Thus we say, like heaven's his ends, no sage of old more bright. 104 Elzix, a master of the art of war, has said, I do not dare to be the host to commence the war. I prefer to be the guest to act on the defensive. I do not dare to advance an inch. I prefer to retire a foot. This is called marshalling the ranks where there are no ranks, bearing the arms to fight where there are no arms to bear, grasping the weapon where there is no weapon to grasp, advancing against the enemy where there is no enemy. There is no calamity greater than lightly engaging in war. To do that is near losing the gentleness, which is so precious. Thus it is that when opposing weapons are actually crossed, he who deplores the situation conquers. 105 LXX, my words are very easy to know, and very easy to practice, but there is no one in the world who is able to know and able to practice them. There is an originating and all-comprehending principle in my words, and an authoritative law for the things which I enforce. It is because they do not know these, that men do not know me. They who know me are few, and I am on that account the more to be prized. It is thus that the sage wears a poor garb of hair-cloth, while he carries his signet of jade in his bosom. 106 LXXI, to know, and yet think we do not know is the highest attainment. Not to know, and yet think we do know is a disease. It is simply by being pained at the thought of having this disease that we are preserved from it. The sage has not the disease. He knows the pain that would be inseparable from it, and therefore he does not have it. 107 LXCI, when the people do not fear what they ought to fear, that which is their great dread will come on them. Let them not thoughtlessly indulge themselves in their ordinary life. Let them not act as if weary of what that life depends on. It is by avoiding such indulgence that such weariness does not arise. Therefore the sage knows these things of himself, but does not parade his knowledge, loves, but does not appear to set a value on himself. And thus he puts the latter alternative away and makes choice of the former. 108 LXCI, he whose boldness appears in his daring to do wrong, in defiance of the laws, is put to death. He whose boldness appears in his not daring to do so, lives on. Of these two cases the one appears to be advantageous, and the other to be injurious. But when heaven's anger smites a man, who the cause shall truly scan, on this account the sage feels a difficulty as to what to do in the former case. It is the way of heaven not to strive, and yet it skillfully overcomes, not to speak, and yet it is skillful in obtaining a reply, does not call, and yet men come to it of themselves. Its demonstrations are quiet, and yet its plans are skillful and effective. The meshes of the net of heaven are large, far apart, but letting nothing escape. 109 LX Civ, the people do not fear death. To what purpose is it to try to frighten them with death? If the people were always in awe of death, and I could always seize those who do wrong, and put them to death, who would dare to do wrong. There is always one who presides over the infliction death. He who would inflict death in the room of him who so presides over it may be described as hewing wood instead of a great carpenter. Seldom is it that he who undertakes the hewing, instead of the great carpenter, does not cut his own hands. 110 LXXV, the people suffer from famine because of the multitude of taxes consumed by their superiors. It is through this that they suffer famine. The people are difficult to govern because of the excessive agency of their superiors in governing them. It is through this that they are difficult to govern. The people make light of dying because of the greatness of their labors in seeking for the means of living. It is this which makes them think light of dying. Thus it is that to leave the subject of living altogether out of view is better than to set a high value on it. 111 LXXVI, man at his birth is supple and weak, at his death, firm and strong. So it is with all things. Trees and plants in their early growth are soft and brittle, at their death, dry and withered. Thus it is that firmness and strength are the concomitants of death, softness and weakness the concomitants of life. Hence he who relies on the strength of his forces does not conquer, and a tree which is strong will fill the outstretched arms, and thereby invites the fellow. Therefore the place of what is firm and strong is below, and that of what is soft and weak is above. 112 LXXVI, may not the way or tau of heaven be compared to the method of bending a bow? The pot of the bow, which was high, is brought low, and what was low is raised up. So heaven diminishes where there is superabundance, and supplements where there is deficiency. It is the way of heaven to diminish superabundance, and to supplement deficiency. It is not so with the way of man. He takes away from those who have not enough to add to his own superabundance. Who can take his own superabundance and therewith serve all under heaven? Only he who is in possession of the Tao. Therefore the ruling sage acts without claiming the results as his. He achieves his merit and does not rest arrogantly in it. He does not wish to display his superiority. 113 LXXVI, there is nothing in the world more soft and weak than water, and yet for attacking things that are firm and strong there is nothing that can take precedence of it. For there is nothing so effectual for which it can be changed. Everyone in the world knows that the soft overcomes the hard, and the weak the strong, but no one is able to carry it out in practice. Therefore a sage has said, he who accepts his state's reproach is hailed, therefore its altar's laud. To him who bears men's direful woes they all the name of king accord. Words that are strictly true seem to be paradoxical. 114 LX6, when a reconciliation is effected between two parties. After a great animosity, there is sure to be a grudge remaining in the mind of the one who was wrong. And how can this be beneficial to the other? Therefore, to guard against this, the sage keeps the left-hand portion of the record of the engagement and does not insist on the speedy fulfillment of it by the other party. So, he who has the attributes of the Tao regards only the conditions of the engagement, while he who has not those attributes regards only the conditions favorable to himself. In the way of heaven, there is no partiality of love. It is always on the side of the good man. 115 LXXX. In a little state with a small population, I would so order it that, though there were individuals with the abilities of 10 or 100 men, there should be no employment of them. I would make the people, while looking on death as a grievous thing, yet not remove elsewhere, to avoid it. Though they had boats and carriages, they should have no occasion to ride in them. Though they had buff coats and sharp weapons, they should have no occasion to don or use them. I would make the people return to the use of knotted cards instead of the written characters. They should think their costs food sweet, their plain clothes beautiful, their poor dwellings places of rest, and their common simple ways sources of enjoyment. There should be a neighboring state within sight, and the voices of the fowls and dogs should be heard all the way from it to us. But I would make the people to old age, even to death, not have any intercourse with it. 116 LXXXI. Sincere words are not fine words are not sincere. Those who are skilled in the Tao do not dispute about it. The disputatious are not skilled in it. Those who know the Tao are not extensively learned. The extensively learned do not know it. The sage does not accumulate for himself. The more that he expends for others, the more does he possess of his own. The more that he gives to others, the more does he have himself. With all the sharpness of the way of heaven, it injures not. With all the doing in the way of the sage, he does not strive. 117. Tao Te Ching by Laozi, translated by James Legge. Was Taoism older than Laozi? In writing the preface to the third volume of these sacred books of the East in 1879, I referred to Laozi as the acknowledged founder of the system of Taoism. Prolonged study and research, however, have brought me to the conclusion that there was a Taoism earlier than his, and that before he wrote his Tao Te Ching, the principles taught in it had been promulgated, and the ordering of human conduct and government flowing from them inculcated. For more than 1,000 years, the three religions has been a stereotyped phrase in China, meaning what we call Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. The phrase itself simply means the three teachings, or systems of instruction, leaving the subject matter of each teaching to be learned by inquiry. Of the three, Buddhism is of course the most recent, having been introduced into China only the 1st century of our Christian era. Both the others were indigenous to the country, and are traceable to a much greater antiquity, so that it is a question to which the earlier origin should be assigned. The years of Confucius's life lay between BC 551 and 478, but his own acknowledgement that he was a transmitter and not a maker, and the testimony of his grandson that he handed down the doctrines of Yao and Shun, BC 2300, and elegantly displayed the regulations of Wan and Wu, BC 1200, taking them as his model, are well known. Laozi's birth is said, in the most likely account of it, to have taken place in the 3rd year of King Ting of the Chu dynasty, BC 604. He was thus rather more than 50 years older than Confucius. The two men seem to have met more than once, and I am inclined to think that the name Laozi, as the designation of the other, arose from Confucius's styling him to his disciples, the old philosopher. They met as heads of different schools or schemes of thought, but did not touch, so far as we know, on the comparative antiquity of their views. It is a peculiarity of the Tao Te Ching that any historical element in it is of the vaguest nature possible, and in all its chapters there is not a single proper name. Yet there are some references to earlier sages, whose words the author was copying out, and to sentence-makers, whose maxims he was introducing to illustrate his own sentiments. 5 In the most distant antiquity, he saw a happy society in which his highest ideas of the Tao were realized, and in the 17th chapter, he tells us that in the earliest times, the people did not know that there were their rulers, and when those rulers were most successful in dealing with them, simply said, "We are what we are of ourselves." Evidently mean existed to Laozi at first in a condition of happy innocence, in what we must call a paradisiacal state, according to his idea of what such a state was likely to be. When we turn from the treatise of Laozi to the writings of Chuang Tzu, the greatest of his followers, we are not left in doubt as to his belief in an early state of paradisiacal Taoism. Huang Tai, the 1st year of whose reign is placed in BC 2697, is often introduced as a seeker of the Tao, and is occasionally condemned as having been one of the first to disturb its rule in men's minds and break up the state of perfect unity. He mentions several sovereigns of whom we can hardly find a trace in the records of history as having ruled in the primeval period, and gives us more than one description of the condition of the world during that happy time. Point 6. I do not think that Chuang Tzu had any historical evidence for the statements which he makes about those early days, the men who flourished in them, and their ways. His narratives are for the most part fictions, in which the names and incidents are of his own devising. They are no more true as matters of fact than the accounts of the characters in Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress are true, with reference to any particular individuals. But as these last are grandly true of myriads of minds in different ages, so may we read in Chuang Tzu's stories the thoughts of Taoistic men beyond the restrictions of place and time. He believed that those thoughts were as old as the men to whom he attributed them. I find in his belief a ground for believing myself that to Taoism, as well as to Confucianism, we ought to attribute a much earlier origin than the famous men whose names they bear. Perhaps they did not differ so much at first as they came afterwards to do in the hands of Confucius and Laozi, both great thinkers, the one more of a moralist, and the other more of a metaphysician. When and how, if they were ever more akin than they came to be, their divergence took place, are difficult questions on which it may be well to make some remarks, after we have tried to set forth the most important principles of Taoism. Those principles have to be learned from the treatise of Laozi and the writings of Chuang Tzu. We can hardly say that the Taoism taught in them is the Taoism now current in China, or that has been current in it for many centuries. But in an inquiry into the nature and origin of religions, these are the authorities that must be consulted for Taoism, and whose evidence must be accepted. The treatise, actions, and the responses to them will show one of the phases of it at a much later period. The texts of the Tao Te Ching and Chuang Tzu Shu, as regards their authenticity and genuineness, and the arrangement of them I will now state briefly. First, the grounds on which I accept the Tao Te Ching as a genuine production of the age to which it has been assigned, and the truth of its authorship by Laozi to whom it has been ascribed. It would not have been necessary a few years ago to write as if these points could be called in question, but in 1886, Mr. Herbert A. Giles, of Her Majesty's Consular Service in China, and one of the ablest Chinese scholars living, vehemently called them in question in an article in the China Review for the months of March and April. His strictures have been replied to, and I am not going to revive here the controversy which they produced, but only to state a portion of the evidence which satisfies my own mind on the 2 points just mentioned. It has been said above that the year BC 604 was probably that of Laozi's birth. The year of his death is not recorded. S. Suma Ch. Letitubdien, the first great Chinese historian, who died in about BC 85, commences his biographies with a short account of Laozi. He tells us that the philosopher had been a curator of the Royal Library of Chu, and that, mourning over the decadence of the dynasty, he wished to withdraw from the world, and proceeded to the pass or defile of Hangu, 7 leading from China to the west. There he was recognized by the warden of the pass, Yin Hsi, often called Quan Yin, himself a well-known Taoist, who insisted on his leaving him a writing before he went into seclusion. Laozi then wrote his views on the Tao and its characteristics, in 2 parts or sections, containing more than 5,000 characters, gave the manuscript to the warden, and went his way, 8, nor is it known where he died. This account is strange enough, and we need not wonder that it was by and by embellished with many marvels. It contains, however, the definite statements that Laozi wrote the Tao Te Ching in 2 parts, and consisting of more than 5,000 characters, and that Ch. Letitubdien was himself well acquainted with the treatise is apparent from his quotations from it, with, in almost every case, the specification of the author. He thus adduces part of the first chapter, and a large portion of the last chapter but one. His brief reference also to Laozi and his writings are numerous. But between Laozi and S. Suma Ch. Letitubdien, there were many Taoist writers whose works remain. I may specify of them Li Tzu, assuming that his chapters, though not composed in their present form by him, may yet be accepted as fair specimens of his teaching, Chuang Tzu of the 4th century BC. We find him refusing to accept high office from King Y of Ch. Letitubdu, BC 339-299. Han Fei, a voluminous author, who died by his own hand in BC 230, and Liu An, a scion of the imperial house of Han, king of Huainan, and better known to us as Huainan Tizu, who also died by his own hand in BC 122. In the books of all these men, we find quotations of many passages that are in our treatise. They are expressly said to be, many of them, quotations from Laozi. Han Fei several times all but shows the book beneath his eyes. To show how numerous the quotations by Han Fei and Liu and let it be borne in mind that the Tao Te Ching has come down to us as divided into 81 short chapters, and that the whole of it is shorter than the shortest of our Gospels. Of the 81 chapters, either the whole or portions of 71 are found in those two writers. There are other authors not so decidedly Taoistic, in whom we find quotations from the little book. These quotations are in general wonderfully correct. Various readings indeed there are, but if we were sure that the writers did trust to memory, their differences would only prove that copies of the text had been multiplied from the very first. In passing on from quotations to the complete text, I will clinch the assertion that Ch. Letitubdien was well acquainted with our treatise, by a passage from the history of the former Han dynasty, BC 206 ad 24, which was begun to be compiled by Pan Ku, who died however in 92, and left a portion to be completed by his sister, the famous Pan Kao. The 32nd chapter of his biographies is devoted to Suma Ch. Letitubdien, and towards the end it is said that, on the subject of the great Tao, he preferred Huang and Lao to the six Ching. Huang and Lao, must there be the writings of Huang Tai and Laozi. The association of the two names also illustrates the antiquity claimed for Taoism, and the subject of endnote 4. We go on from quotations to complete texts, and turn first to the catalogue of the Imperial Library of Han, as compiled by Liu H. Sin, not later than the commencement of our Christian era. There are entered in it Taoist works by 37 different authors, containing in all 993 chapters or sections, P. Letitubdien. Yi Yin, the premier of Xiechang T. Letitubdeng, BC 1766, heads the list with 51 sections. There are in it 4 editions of Laozi's work with commentaries, by a Mr. Lin in 4 sections, a Mr. Fu in 37 sections, a Mr. H. Su in 6 sections, and by Liu H. Xiang, H. Sin's own father, in 4 sections. All these 4 works have since perished, but there they were in the Imperial Library before our era began. Chuang Tizu is in the same list in 52 books or sections, the greater part of which have happily escaped the devouring tooth of time. We turn now to the 20th chapter of Ch. Letitubdens biographies, in which he gives an account of Yue, the scion of a distinguished family, and who himself played a famous part, both as a politician and military leader, and became Prince of Wangshu under the kingdom of Kao in BC 279. Among his descendants was a Yue Xiechan, who learned in Ch. Letitubdi the words, that is, the Taoistic writings of Huang Tai and Laozi from an old man who lived on the Ho side. The origin of this old man was not known, but Yue Xiechan taught what he learned from him to a mystico, who again became preceptor to T.S. Letitubdi O.T.S. Letitubdi N, the chief minister of Ch. Letitubdi, and afterwards of the new dynasty of Han, dying in BC 190. Referring now to the catalogue of the Imperial Library of the dynasty of Sui, ad 502-556, we find that it contained many editions of Lao's treatise with commentaries. The first mentioned is the Tao Te Ching, with the commentary of the old man of the Ho side, in the time of the Emperor Wan of Han, BC 179-142. It is added in a note that the dynasty of Liang, ad 502-556, had possessed the edition of The Old Man of the Ho side, of the time of the Warring States, but that with some other texts and commentaries it had disappeared. I find it difficult to believe that there had been 2 old men of the Ho side, 9 both teachers of Taoism and commentators on our Ching, but I am willing to content myself with the more recent work, and accept the copy that has been current, say from BC 150. When Suma Ch. Letitubdien could have been little more than a boy. Taoism was a favorite study with many of the Han emperors and their ladies. Huainan Tizu, of whose many quotations from the text of Lao I have spoken, was an uncle of the Emperor Wan. To Emperor Ching, BC 156-143, the son of Wan, there is attributed the designation of Lao's treatise as a Ching, a work of standard authority. At the beginning of his reign, we are told, someone was commending to him 4 works, among which were those of Laozi and Chuang-Tzu. Deeming that the work of Huang-Tzu and Laozi was of a deeper character than the others, he ordered that it should be called a Ching, established a bod for the study of Taoism, and issued an edict that the book should be learned and recited at court and throughout the country. 10 Thenceforth, it was so styled. We find Huang Fu Mai, ad 215-282, referring to it as the Tao Te Ching. The second place in the Sui catalogue is given to the text and commentary of Wang Pai, or Wang Fuesu, an extraordinary scholar who died in AD 249 at the early age of 24. This work has always been much prized. It was its text which Lu Taming used in his explanation of the terms and phrases of the classics in the 7th century. Among the editions of it which I possess is that printed in 1794 with the imperial movable metal types. I need not speak of editions or commentaries subsequent to Wang Pai's. They soon begin to be many, and are only not so numerous as those of the Confucian classics. All the editions of the book are divided into 2 parts, the former called Tao, and the latter Te, meaning the qualities or characteristics of the Tao, but this distinction of subjects is by no means uniformly adhered to. I referred already to the division of the whole into 81 short chapters, 37 plus 44, which is by common tradition attributed to Ho Shang Kung, or the old man of the Ho side. Another very early commentator, called Yen Tsun or Yen Chunping, made a division into 72 chapters, 40 plus 32, under the influence, no doubt, of some mystical considerations. His predecessor, perhaps, had no better reason for his 81, but the names of his chapters were, for the most part, happily chosen and have been preserved. Wu Xiechang arranged the 2 parts in 67 chapters, 31 plus 36. It is a mistake, however, to suppose, as even Mr. Wiley with all his general accuracy did, 11 that Wu curtails the ordinary text to some extent. He does not curtail, but only rearranges according to his fashion, uniting some of Ho Shang Kung's chapters in one, and sometimes altering the order their clauses. S. Suma Ch. Letter 2 BDIEN tells us that, as the treatise came from Laozi, it contained more than 5,000 characters, that is, as one critic says, more than 5,000 and fewer than 6,000. Ho Shang Kung's text has 5,350, and one copy 5,590. Wang Pai's, 5,683, and one copy 5,610. 2 other early texts have been counted, giving 5,720 and 5,635 characters respectively. The brevity arises from the terse conciseness of the style, owing mainly to the absence of the embellishment of particles, which forms so striking a peculiarity in the composition of Mencius and Chuang-Tzu. In passing on to speak, secondly, and more briefly, of the far more voluminous writings of Chuang-Tzu, I may say that I do not know of any other book so ancient a date as the Tao Te Ching, of which the authenticity of the origin and genuineness of the text can claim to be so well substantiated. 12. What is the meaning of the name Tao? And the chief points of the belief in Taoism. The first translation of the Tao Te Ching into a Western language was executed in Latin by some of the Roman Catholic missionaries, and a copy of it was brought to England by a Mr. Matthew Raper, FRS, and presented by him to the Society at a meeting on the 10th January, 1788. Being the gift to him of P. Jos de Gramont, Missionarius Apostolicus, ex Jesuita. In this version, Tao is taken in the sense of ratio, or the supreme reason of the divine being, the creator and governor. M. Abel Musat, the first professor of Chinese in Paris, does not seem to have been aware of the existence of the above version in London, but his attention was attracted to Lao's treatise about 1820, and in 1823 he wrote of the character Tao. Si mot mi semble ni pas pouvoir et bien traduit, si en est par la mot lambda omicron gamma omicron sigma dans le triple sens de souverain état, de racine, et de parole. Musat's successor in the chair of Chinese, the late Stanislas Julien, published in 1842 a translation of the whole treatise. Having concluded from an examination of it, and the earliest Taoist writers, such as Chuang-Tzu, Huang-Tzu, and Ho Shang Kung, that the Tao was devoid of action, of thought, of judgment, and of intelligence, He concluded that it was impossible to understand by it the primordial reason, or the sublime intelligence which created and which governs the world. And to this he subjoined the following note: Quelque étrange que puisse paraître cette idée de Laozi, elle n'est pas sans exemple dans l'histoire de la philosophie. La mot nature n'a-t-il pas été employée par certains philosophes, que la religion et la raison condamnent, pas dessinent une cause première, également dépourvue de pensée et d'intelligence. Julian himself did not doubt that Lao's idea of the character was that it primarily and properly meant a way, and hence he translated the title Tao Te Ching by la Liva de la Voix et de la Vertu, transferring at the same time the name Tao to the text of his version. The first English writer who endeavored to give a distinct account of Taoism was the late Archdeacon Hardwicke, while he held the office of Christian advocate in the University of Cambridge. In his Christ and Other Masters, Vol. Roman 2p. 67, when treating of the religions of China, he says, I feel disposed to argue that the center of the system founded by Laozi had been awarded to some energy or power resembling the nature of modern speculators. The indefinite expression Tao was adopted to denominate an abstract cause, or the initial principle of life and order, to which worshippers were able to assign the attributes of immateriality, eternity, immensity, invisibility. It was, probably, Julian's reference in his note to the use of the term nature, which suggested to Hardwicke his analogy between Laozi's Tao and the nature of modern speculation. Canon Farrar has said, We have long personified under the name of nature the sum total of God's laws as observed in the physical world, and now the notion of nature as a distinct, living, independent entity seems to be ineradicable alike from our literature and our systems of philosophy. 13. But it seems to me that this metaphorical or mythological use of the word nature for the cause and ruler of it implies the previous notion of him, that is, of God in the mind. Does not this clearly appear in the words of Seneca? Vis illum, ecce. Jovem diem, naturam voca, non peccabis? Hic est ex quo nata sunt omnia, cujus spiritu vivimus. 14. In his translation of the works of Chuang Tzu in 1881, Mr. Balfour adopted nature as the ordinary rendering of the Chinese Tao. He says, when the word is translated way of nature, her processes, her methods, and her laws, when translated reason, it is the same as lie, the power that works in all created things, producing, preserving, and life-giving, the intelligent principle of the world. When translated doctrine, it refers to the true doctrine respecting the laws, the mysteries of nature. He calls attention also to the point that he uses nature in the sense of natura naturans, while the Chinese expression wan wu, equals all things, denotes natura naturata. But this really comes to the metaphorical use of nature which has been touched upon above. It can claim as its patrons great names like those of Aquinas, Giordano Bruno, and Spinoza, but I have never been able to see that its barbarous phraseology makes it more than a figure of speech. 15. The term nature, however, is so handy, and often fits so appropriately into a version, that if Tao had ever such a signification, I should not hesitate to employ it as freely as Mr. Balfour has done. But as it has not that signification, to try to put a non-natural meaning into it only perplexes the mind and obscures the idea of Laozi. Mr. Balfour himself says, the primary signification of Tao is simply road. Beyond question, this meaning underlies the use of it by the great master of Taoism, and by Chuang Tzu. 16. Let the reader refer to the version of the 25th chapter of Lao's treatise, and to the notes subjoined to it. The Tao appears as the spontaneously operating cause of all movement in the phenomena of the universe, and the nearest the writer can come to a name for it is the Great Tao. Having established this name, he subsequently uses it repeatedly. See Chh. Roman 34 and Lai. In the third paragraph of his 20th chapter, Chuang Tzu uses a synonymous phrase instead of Lao's Great Tao, calling it the Great T letter 2bdu, about which there can be no dispute, as meaning the Great Path, way, or cause. 17. In the last paragraph, his 25th book, Chuang Tzu again sets forth the metaphorical origin of the name Tao. Tao, he says, cannot be regarded as having a positive existence. Existences cannot be regarded as non-existent. The name Tao is a metaphor used for the purpose of description. To say that it exercises some causation, or that it does nothing, is speaking of it from the phase of a thing, How can such language serve as a designation of it in its greatness? If words were sufficient for the purpose, we might in a day's time exhaust the subject of the Tao. Words not being sufficient, we may talk about it the whole day, and the subject of discourse will only have been a thing. Tao is the extreme to which things conduct us. Neither speech nor silence is sufficient to convey the notion of it. When we neither speak nor refrain from speech, our speculations about it reach their highest point. The Tao, therefore, is a phenomenon, not a positive being, but a mode of being. Lao's idea of it may become plainer as we proceed to other points of his system. In the meantime, the best way of dealing with it in translating is to transfer it to the version, instead of trying to introduce an English equivalent of it. Next in importance to Tao is the name T-letter-2-B-D-I-E-N, meaning at first the vaulted sky or the open firmament of heaven. In the Confucian classics, and in the speech of the Chinese people, this name is used metaphorically as it is by ourselves for the Supreme Being, with reference especially to his will and rule. So it was that the idea of God arose among the Chinese fathers. So it was that they proceeded to fashion a name for God, calling him Tai and Shang Tai, the ruler and the supreme ruler. The Taoist fathers found this among their people, but in their idea of the Tao, they had already a supreme concept which superseded the necessity of any other. The name Tai for God only occurs once in the Tao Te Ching, in the well-known passage of the 4th chapter, where, speaking of the Tao, Laozi says, "I do not know whose son it is. It might seem to be before God." Nor is the name T-letter-2-B-D-I-E-N very common. We have the phrase, heaven and earth, used for the two great constituents of the cosmos, owing their origin to the Tao, and also for a sort of binomial power, acting in harmony with the Tao, covering, protecting, nurturing, and maturing all things. Never once is T-letter-2-B-D-I-E-N used in the sense of God, the Supreme Being. In its peculiarly Taoistic employment, it is more an adjective than a noun. The Tao of heaven means the Tao that is heavenly, the cause that is quiet and undemonstrative, that is free from motive and effort, such as is seen in the processes of nature, grandly proceeding and successful without any striving or crying. The Tao of man, not dominated by this Tao, is contrary to it, and shows will, purpose, and effort, till submitting to it, it becomes the Tao or way of the sages, which in all its action has no striving. The characteristics both of heaven and man are dealt with more fully by Chuang than by Lao. In the conclusion of his 11th book, for instance, he says, "What do we mean by Tao? There is the Tao or way of heaven, and there is the Tao of man. Acting without action and yet attracting all honor is the way of heaven. Doing and being embarrassed thereby is the way of man. The way of heaven should play the part of Lord, the way of man, the part of minister. The two are far apart and should be distinguished from each other." In his next book, Pa. 2, Chuang Tzu tells us what he intends by heaven. Acting without action, this is what is called heaven. Heaven thus taken its law from the Tao. The oldest sages and sovereigns attained to do the same. It was for all men to aim at the same achievement. As they were successful, vacancy, stillness, placidity, tastelessness, quietude, silence, and non-action would be found to be their characteristics, and they would go on to the perfection of the Tao. 18. The employment of T-letter-2-B-D-I-E-N by the Confucianists, as of heaven by ourselves, must be distinguished, therefore, from the Taoistic use of the name to denote the quiet but mighty influence of the impersonal Tao, and to translate it by God only obscures the meaning of the Taoist writers. This has been done by Mr. Giles in his version of Chuang Tzu, which is otherwise for the most part so good. Everywhere on his pages there appears the great name, God. A blot on his translation more painful to my eyes and ears than the use of nature for Tao by Mr. Balfour. I know that Mr. Giles's plan in translating is to use strictly English equivalents for all kinds of Chinese terms. 19. The plan is good where there are in the two languages such strict equivalents. But in the case before us, there is no ground for its application. The exact English equivalent for the Chinese T-letter-2-B-D-I-E-N is our heaven. The Confucianists often used T-letter-2-B-D-I-E-N metaphorically for the personal being whom they denominated Tai, God, and Shang Tai, the supreme God, and a translator may occasionally, in working on books of Confucian literature, employ our name God for it. But neither Lao nor Chuang ever attached anything like our idea of God to it. And when one, in working on books of early Taoist literature, translates T-letter-2-B-D-I-E-N by God, such a rendering must fail to produce in an English reader a correct apprehension of the meaning. There is also, in Chuang-Tzu, a peculiar usage of the name T-Ien. He applies it to the being whom he introduces as masters of the Tao, generally with mystical appellations in order to set forth his own views. 2 instances from Book Roman 11 will suffice in illustration of this. In Fa, Huang Tai does reverence to his instructor Kuang Xiechang Tizu, 20 saying, "In Kuang Xiechang Tizu, we have an example of what is called heaven, which Mr. Giles renders, Kuang Xiechang Tizu is surely God." In Pa, 5 again, the mystical Yunqiang is made to say to the equally fabulous and mystical Hungmang, "O heaven, have you forgotten me?" And, farther on, "O heaven, you have conferred on me the knowledge of your operation, and revealed to me the mystery of it." In both passages, Mr. Giles renders T-Ien by, "Your Holiness." But Mr. Giles seems to agree with me that the old Taoist had no idea of a personal God when they wrote of T-Ien or heaven. On his 68th page, near the beginning of Book VI, we meet with the following sentence, having every appearance of being translated from the Chinese text. God is a principle which exists by virtue of its own intrinsicality and operates without self-manifestation. By an inadvertence, he has introduced his own definition of God, as if it were Chuang-Tzu's, and though I can find no characters in the text of which I can suppose that he intends it to be the translation, it is valuable as helping us to understand the meaning to be attached to the great name in his volume. I have referred above Pa 11 to the only passage in Lao's treatise where he uses the name Tai or God in its highest sense, saying that the Tao might seem to have been before him. He might well say so. For his first chapter he describes the Tao, conceived of as having no name, as the originator of heaven and earth, and conceived of as having a name, as the mother of all things. The reader will also find the same predicates of the Tao at greater length in his 51st chapter. The character Tai is also of rare occurrence in Chuang-Tzu, excepting as applied to the 5 ancient Tis. In BK, Roman 3 Pa, Fa, and in one other place we find it indicating the Supreme Being, but the usage is ascribed to the ancients. In BK, Roman 15 Pa, 3, in a description of the human spirit, its name is said to be T-Bdung Tai, which Mr. Giles renders of God, Mr. Balfa, one with God, while my own version is the divinity in man. In BK, Roman 12 Pa, 6, we have the expression, the place of God. In Mr. Giles, the kingdom of God. In Mr. Balfa, the home of God. In this and the former instance, the character seems to be used with the ancient meaning which had entered into folklore of the people. But in BK, VI Pa 7, there is passage which shows clearly the relative position of Tao and Tai in the Taoistic system, and having called attention to it, I will go on to other points. Let the reader mark well the following predicates of the Tao. Before there were heaven and earth, form of old, there it was, securely existing. From it came the mysterious existence of spirits, from it the mysterious existence of Tai, God. It produced heaven, it produced earth. 21. This says more than the utterance of Lao, that the Tao seemed to be before God. Does it not say that Tao was before God, and that he was what he is by virtue of its operation? Among the various personal names given to the Tao are those of Cao Hua, maker and transformer, and Cao Wu Che, maker of things. Instances of both these names are found in BK. VI Pa 9-10. Creator and God have both been employed for them, but there is no idea of creation in Taoism. Again and again, Chuang-Tzu entertains the question of how it was at the first beginning of things. Different views are stated. In BK, Roman 2 Pa, Fa, he says, among the men of old their knowledge reached the extreme point. What was that extreme point? Some held that at first there was not anything. This is the extreme point, the utmost limit to which nothing can be added. A second class held that there was something, but without any responsive recognition of it on the part of man. A third class held that there was such recognition, but there had not begun to be any expression of different opinions about it. It was through the definite expression of different opinions about it that there ensued injury to the doctrine of the Tao. 22. The first of these 3 views was that which Chuang-Tzu himself preferred. The most condensed expression of it is given in BK. Roman 12 Pa 8. In the grand beginning of all things there was nothing in all the vacancy of space. There was nothing that could be named. 23. It was in this state that there arose the first existence. The first existence, but still without bodily shape. From this things could be produced, receiving, what we call their several characters. That which had no bodily shape was divided, and then without intermission, there was what we call the process of conferring. The two processes continued to operate, and things were produced. As they were completed, there appeared the distinguishing lines of each, which we call the bodily shape. That shape was the body preserving in it the spirit, and each had its peculiar manifestation, which we call it nature. Such was the genesis of things, the formation of heaven and earth and all that in them is, under the guidance of the Tao. It was an evolution and not a creation. How the Tao itself came, I do not say into existence, but into operation, neither Lao nor Chuang ever thought of saying anything about. We have seen that it is nothing material. 24 It acted spontaneously of itself. Its sudden appearance in the field of non-existence, producer, transformer, beautifier, surpasses my comprehension. To Lao, it seemed to be before God. I am compelled to accept the existence of God as the ultimate fact, bowing before it with reverence, and not attempting to explain it, the one mystery, the sole mystery of the universe. The bodily shape was the body preserving in it the spirit, and each had its peculiar manifestation, which we call its nature. So it is said in the passage quoted above Chuang Tzu's 12th book, and the language shows how Taoism, in a loose and indefinite way, considered man to be composed of body and spirit, associated together, yet not necessarily dependent on each other. Little is found bearing on his tenet in the Tao Te Ching. The concluding sentence of Ch. 33, "He who dies and yet does not perish has longevity," is of doubtful acceptation. More pertinent is the description of life as a coming forth, and of death as an entering. 25 But Chuang Tzu expounds more fully, though after all unsatisfactorily, the teaching of their system on the subject. At the conclusion of his third book, writing of the death of Laozi, he says, "When the master came, it was at the proper time. When he went away, it was the simple sequence of his coming." Quiet acquiescence in what happens at its proper time, and quietly submitting to its sequence, afford no occasion for grief or for joy. The ancients described death as the loosening of the cord on which God suspended the life. What we can point to are the faggots that have been consumed, but the fire is transmitted elsewhere, and we know not that it is over and ended. It is, however, in connection with the death of his own wife, as related in the 18th book, that his views most fully, I do not say clearly, appear. We are told that when that event took place, his friend Huey Tzu went to condole with him and found him squatted on the ground, drumming on the vessel of ice and singing. His friend said to him, "When a wife has lived with her husband, brought up children, and then dies in her old age, not to wail for her is enough. When you go on to drum on the vessel and sing, is it not an excessive and strange demonstration?" Chuang Tzu replied, "It is not so. When she first died, was it possible for me to be singular and not affected by the event? But I reflected on the commencement of her being, when she had not yet been born to life. Not only had she no life, but she had no bodily form. Not only had she no bodily form, but she had no breath. Suddenly in this chaotic condition there ensued a change, and there was breath. Another change, and there was the bodily form. A further change, and she was born to life. A change no again, and she is dead. The relation between those changes is like the procession of the 4 seasons, spring, autumn, winter, and summer. There she lies with her face up, sleeping in the great chamber. 26 And if I were to fall sobbing and going on to wail for her, I should think I did not understand what was appointed for all. I therefore restrained myself." The next paragraph of the same book contains another story about 2 ancient men, both deformed, who, when looking at the graves on Kunlun, begin to feel in their own frames the symptoms of approaching dissolution. One says to the other, "Do you dread it?" and gets the reply, "No. Why should I dread it? Life is a borrowed thing. The living frame thus borrowed is but so much dust. Life and death are like day and night. In every birth, it would thus appear there is, somehow, a repetition of what it is said, as we have seen, took place at the grand beginning of all things. When out of the primal nothingness, the Tao somehow appeared, and there was developed through its operation the world of things, material things and the material body of man, which enshrines or enshrouds an immaterial spirit. This returns to the Tao that gave it, and may be regarded indeed as that Tao operating in the body during the time of life, and in due time receives a new embodiment. In these notions of Taoism, there was preparation for the appreciation, by its followers of the Buddhistic system, when it came to be introduced into the country, and which forms a close connection between the two at the present day, Taoism itself constantly becoming less definite and influential, on the minds of the Chinese people. The book, which tells us of the death of Chuang Tizu's wife, concludes with a narrative about Li Tizu and an old bleached skull. 27, and to this is appended a passage about the metamorphoses of things, ending with the statement that the panther produces the hoss, and the hoss the man, who then again enters into the great machinery of evolution, from which all things come forth at birth, and into which they re-enter at death. Such representations need not be characterized. Chu Hsi, the prince of literature, described the main object of Taoism to be the preservation of the breath of life. And Liu Mai, probably of our 13th century, 28, in his dispassionate comparison of the three religions, declared that its chief achievement is the prolongation of longevity. Such is the account of Taoism originality given by Confucian and Buddhist writers, but our authorities, Lao and Chuang, hardly bear out this representation of it as true of their time. There are chapters of the Tao Te Ching which presuppose a peculiar management of the breath, but the treatise is singularly free from anything to justify what Mr. Balfour well calls the antics of Kung Fu, our system of mystic and recondite calisthenics. Lao insists, however, on the Tao as conducive to long life, and in Chuang Tizu we have references to it as discipline of longevity, though even he mentions rather with disapproval those who kept blowing and breathing with open mouth, inhaling and exhaling the breath, expelling the old and taking in new, passing their time like the dormant bear, and stretching and twisting their necks like birds. He says that all this simply shows their desire for longevity, and is what the scholars who manage the breath, and men who nourish the body and wish to live as long as Piang Tzu, are fond of doing. 29. My own opinion is that the methods of the Tao were first cultivated for the sake of the longevity which they were thought to promote, and that Lao, discountenancing such a use of them, endeavored to give the doctrine a higher character, and this view is favored by passages in Chuang Tizu. In the 7th paragraph, for instance, of his book Vi, speaking of parties who had obtained the Tao, he begins with a prehistoric sovereign, who got and by it adjusted heaven and earth. Among his other instances in Piang Tzu, who got it in the time of Shun, and lived on to the time of the 5 leading princes of Chu, a longevity of more than 1,800 years, greater than that ascribed to Methuselah. In the paragraph that follows there appear a new Yu, who is addressed by another famous Taoist in the words, "You are old, sir, while your complexion is like that of a child. How is it so?" And the reply is, "I became acquainted with the Tao." I will adduce only one more passage of Chuang. In his 11th book, and the 4th paragraph, he tells us of interviews between Huang Tai, in the 19th year of his reign, which would be BC 2679, and his instructor Kuang Xiecheng Tizu. The Taoist sage is not readily prevailed on to unfold the treasures of his knowledge to the sovereign, but at last his reluctance is overcome, and he says to him, "Come, and I will tell you about the perfect Tao. Its essence is surrounded with the deepest obscurity, its highest reach is in darkness and silence. There is nothing to be seen, nothing to be heard. When it holds the spirit in its arms in stillness, then the bodily form will of itself become correct. You must be still, you must be pure, not subjecting your body to toil, not agitating your vital force. Then you may live for long. When your eyes see nothing, your ears hear nothing, and your mind knows nothing, your spirit will keep your body, and the body will live long. Watch over what is within you. Shut up the avenues that connect you with what is external. Much knowledge is pernicious. I will proceed with you to the summit of the grand brilliance, where we come to the bright and expanding element. I will enter with you the great of the dark and depressing element. There heaven and earth have their controllers, there the yin and yang have their repositories. Watch over and keep your body, and all things will of themselves give it vigor. I mean the original unity of these elements. In this way, I have cultivated myself for 1,200 years, and my bodily form knows no decay. Add 1,200 to 2,679, and we obtain 3879 as the year BC of Kuang Xiecheng Tizu's birth. Laozi describes some other and kindred results of cultivating the Tao in terms which are sufficiently startling and which it is difficult to accept. In his 50th chapter he says, "He who is skillful in managing his life travels on land without having to shun rhinoceros or tiger, and enter a host without having avoid buff coat or sharp weapon. The rhinoceros finds no place in him into which to thrust its horn, nor the tiger a place in which to fix its claws, nor the weapon a place to admit its point. And for what reason? because there is in him no place of death. To the same effect he says in his 55th chapter, he who has in himself abundantly the attributes of the Tao is like an infant. Poisonous insects will not sting him, fierce beasts will not seize him, birds of prey will not strike him. Such assertions startle us by their contrariety to our observation and experience, but so does most of the teaching of Taoism. What can seem more absurd than the declaration that the Tao does nothing, and so there is nothing that it does not do? And yet this is one of the fundamental axioms of the system. The 37th chapter, which enunciates it, goes on to say, if princes and kings were able to maintain the Tao, all things would of themselves be transformed by them. This principle, if we can call it so, is generalized in the 40th, one of the shortest chapters and partly in rhyme. The movement of the Tao by contraries proceeds, and weakness mocks the cause of Tao's mighty deeds. All things under heaven sprang from it as existing, and named, that existence sprang from it as non-existent, and not named. Ho Shang Kung, or whoever gave their names to the chapters of the Tao Te Ching, styles this 40th chapter, dispensing with the use of means. If the wish to use means arise in the mind, the nature of the Tao as the nameless simplicity has been vitiated, and this nature is celebrated in lines like those just quoted. Simplicity without a name is free from all external aim. With no desire, at rest and still, all things go right, as of their will. I do not cull any passages from Chuang Tzu to illustrate these points. In his 11th book, his subject is government by let be and the exercise of forbearance. This Tao ruled men at first, and then the world was in a paradisiacal state. Neither of our authorities tells us how long this condition lasted, but as Lao observes in his 18th chapter, the Tao ceased to be observed. Chuang Tzu, however, gives us more than one description of what he considered the paradisiacal state was. He calls it the age of perfect virtue. In the 13th paragraph of his 12th book he says, in this age they attached no value to wisdom, nor employed men of ability. Superiors were, but, as the higher branches of a tree, and the people were like the deer of the wild. They were upright and correct, without knowing that to be so was righteousness. They loved one another, without knowing that to do so was benevolence. They were honest and loyal-hearted, without knowing that it was loyalty. They fulfilled their engagements without knowing that to do so was good faith. In their movements they employed the services of one another, without thinking that they were conferring or receiving any gift. Therefore their actions left no trace, and there was no record of their affairs. Again, in the 4th paragraph of his 10th book, addressing an imaginary interlocutor, he says, "Are you, sir, unacquainted with the age of perfect virtue?" He then gives the names of 12 sovereigns who ruled in it, of the greater number of whom we have no other means of knowing anything, and goes on. In their times the people used knotted cords in carrying on their business. They thought their simple food pleasant and their plain clothing beautiful. They were happy in their simple manners and felt at rest in their poor dwellings. The people of neighboring states might be able to descry one another. The voices of their cocks and dogs might be heard from one to the other. They might not die till they were old, and yet all their life they would have no communication together. In those times perfect good order prevailed. One other description of the primeval state is still more interesting. It is in the 2nd paragraph of BK. Roman 9. The people had their regular and constant nature. They wove and made themselves clothes. They tilled the ground and got food. This was their common faculty. They were all one in this, and did not for themselves into separate classes, so were they constituted and left to their natural tendencies. Therefore, in the age of perfect virtue, men walked along with slow and grave step, and with their looks steadily directed forwards. On the hills there were no footpaths nor exacted passages. On the lakes there were no boats nor dams. All creatures lived in companies, and their places of settlement were made near to one another. Birds and beasts multiplied to flocks and herds. The grass and trees grew luxuriant and long. The birds and beasts might be led about without feeling the constraint. The nest of the magpie might be climbed to and peeped into. Yes, in the age of perfect virtue, men lived in common with birds and beasts, and were on terms of equality with all creatures, as forming one family. How could they know among themselves the distinctions of superior men and small men? Equally without knowledge, they did not leave the path of their natural virtue. Equally free from desires, they were in the state of pure simplicity. In their pure simplicity, their nature was what it ought to be. Such were the earliest Chinese of whom Chuang Tzu could venture to give any account. If ever their ancestors had been in a ruder or savage condition, it must have been at a much antecedent time. These had long passed out of such a state. They were tillers of the ground, and acquainted with the use of the loom. They lived in happy relations with one another, and in kindly harmony with the tribes of inferior creatures. But there is not the slightest allusion to any sentiment of piety as animating them individually, or to any ceremony of religion as observed by them in common. This surely is a remarkable feature in their condition. I call attention to it, but I do not dwell upon it. But by the time of Lao and Chuang, the cultivation of the Tao had fallen into disuse. The simplicity of life which it demanded, with its freedom from all disturbing speculation and action, was no longer to be found in individual or in government. It was the general decay of manners and of social order which unsettled the mind. Lao made him resign his position as curator of the Royal Library and determined to withdraw from China and hide himself among the rude peoples beyond it. The cause of the deterioration of the Tao and of all the evils of the nation was attributed to the ever-growing pursuit of knowledge and of what we call the arts of culture. It had commenced very long before. In the time of Huang Tai, Chuang says in one place, 30, and in another, he carries it still higher to Sui Jan and Fuhsi.31, there had been indeed, all along the line of history, a grouping for the rules of life, as indicated by the constitution of man's nature. The results were embodied in the ancient literature, which was the lifelong study of Confucius. He had gathered up that literature. He recognized the nature of man as the gift of heaven or God. The monitions of God as given in the convictions of man's mind supplied him with a Tao or path of duty very different from the Tao or mysterious way of Lao. All this was gall and wormwood to the dreaming librarian or brooding recluse, and made him say, if we could renounce our sageness and discard our wisdom, it would be better for the people 100-fold. If we could renounce our benevolence and discard our righteousness, the people would again become filial and kindly. If we could renounce our artful contrivances and discard our scheming for gain, there would be no thieves nor robbers. 32. We can laugh at this. Taoism was wrong in its opposition to the increase of knowledge. Man exists under a law of progress. In pursuing it, there are demanded discretion and justice. Moral ends must rule over material ends, and advance in virtue be ranked higher than advance in science. So have good and evil, truth and error, to fight out the battle on the field of the world, and in all the range of time, but there is no standing still for the individual or for society. Even Confucius taught his countrymen to set too high a value on the examples of antiquity. The school of Laozi fixing themselves in an unknown region beyond antiquity, a prehistoric time between the grand beginning of all things out of nothing and the unknown commencement of societies of men, has made no advance but rather retrograded, and is represented by the still more degenerated Taoism of the present day. There is a short parabolic story of Chuang Tzu, intended to represent the antagonism between Taoism and knowledge, which has always struck me as curious. The last paragraph of his 7th book is this: the ruler, or God Tai, of the southern ocean was Shu, that is, heedless. The ruler of the northern ocean was Hu, that is, hasty. And the ruler of the center was Huntun, that is, chaos. Shu and Hu were continually meeting in the land of Huntun, who treated them very well. They consulted together how they might repay his kindness, and said, men have all 7 orifices for the purposes of seeing, hearing, eating, and breathing, while this poor ruler along has not one. Let us try and make them for him. Accordingly, they dug 1 orifice in him every day, and at the end of 7 days chaos died. So it was that chaos passed away before light. So did the nameless simplicity of the Tao disappear before knowledge, but it was better that the chaos should give place to the cosmos. Heedless and hasty did a good deed. I have thus set forth 8 characteristics of the Taoistic system, having respect mostly to what is peculiar and mystical in it. I will not conclude my exhibition of it by bringing together, under one head, the practical lessons of its author for men individually, and for the administration of government. The praise of whatever excellence these possess belongs to Lao himself. Chuang Tzu devotes himself mainly to the illustration of the abstruse and difficult points. First, it does not surprise us that in his rules for individual man, Lao should place humility in the foremost place. A favorite illustration with him of the Tao is water. In his 8th chapter he says, the highest excellence is like that of water. The excellence of water appears in its benefiting all things, and in its occupying, without striving to the contrary, the low ground which all men dislike. Hence its way is near to that of the Tao. To the same effect in the 78th chapter, there is nothing in the world more soft and weak than water, and yet for attacking things that are firm and strong there is nothing that can take precedence of it. Everyone in the world knows that the soft overcomes the hard, and the weak the strong, but no one is able to carry it out in practice. In his 67th chapter, Lao associates with humility two other virtues, and calls them his three precious things, or jewels. They are gentleness, economy, and shrinking from taking precedence of others. With that gentleness, he says, I can be bold. With that economy I can be liberal. Shrinking from taking precedence of others, I can become a vessel of the highest honor. And in his 63rd chapter, he rises to a still loftier height of morality. He says, it is the way of the Tao to act without thinking of acting, to conduct affairs without feeling the trouble of them, to taste without discerning any flavor, to consider the small as great and the few as many, and to recompense injury with kindness. Here is the grand Christian precept. Render to no man evil for evil. If thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. Be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. We know that the maxim made some noise in its author's lifetime, that the disciples of Confucius consulted him about it, and that he was unable to receive it. 33. It comes in with less important matters by virtue of the Taoistic rule of contraries. I have been surprised to find what little reference to it I have met within the course of my Chinese reading. I do not think that Chuang Tzu takes notice of it to illustrate it after his fashion. There, however, it is in the Tao Te Ching. The fruit of it has yet to be developed. Second, Lao laid down the same rule for the policy of the state as for the life of the individual. He says in his 61st chapter, what makes a state great is its being like a low-lying, down-flowing stream. It becomes the center to which tend all the small states under heaven. He then uses an illustration which will produce a smile. Take the case of all females. The female always overcomes the male by her stillness. Stillness may be considered a sort of abasement. Resuming his subject, he adds, thus it is that a great state, by condescending to small states, gains them for itself, and that small states, by abasing themselves to a great state, win it over to them. In the one case the abasement tends to gaining adherents, in the other case to procuring favor. The great state only wishes to unite men together and nourish them. A small state only wishes to be received by, and to serve the other. Each gets what it desires, but the great state must learn to abase itself. All very well in theory, someone will exclaim, but the world has not seen it yet reduced to practice. So it is. The fact is deplorable. No one saw the misery arising from it, and exposed its unreasonableness more unsparingly than Chuang Tzu. But it was all in vain in his time, as it has been in all the centuries that have since rolled their course. Philosophy, philanthropy, and religion have still to toil on, faint, yet pursuing, believing that in the time will yet come when humility and love shall secure the reign of peace and goodwill among the nations of men. While enjoining humility, Lao protested against war. In his 31st chapter he says, alms, however beautiful, are instruments of evil omen, hateful, it may be said, to all creatures. They who have the Tao do not like to employ them. Perhaps in his 69th chapter he allows defensive war, but he adds, there is no calamity greater than that of lightly engaging in war. To do that is near losing the gentleness which is so precious. Thus it is that when weapons are actually crossed, he who deplores the situation conquers. There are some other points in the practical lessons of Taoism to which I should like to call the attention of the reader, but I must refer him for them to the chapters of the Tao Te Ching and the books of Chuang Tzu. Its salient features have been set forth somewhat fully. Notwithstanding the scorn poured so freely on Confucius by Chuang Tzu and other Taoist writers, he proved in the course of time too strong for Lao as the teacher of their people. The entrance of Buddhism, moreover, into the country in our first century was very injurious to Taoism, which still exists, but is only the shadow of its former self. It is tolerated by the government, but not patronized as it was when emperors and empresses seemed to think more of it than of Confucianism. It is by the spread of knowledge, which it had always opposed, that its overthrow and disappearance will be brought about ere long.